Yes, we are.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, and welcome, folk, to our meeting today. It's a reasonably full agenda. We have one external guest, which I presume Fee will be with us soon, if not with us already, which is Derek Olsen now.
Yep,
Derek. Bruce, I'm you ready.
Oh, g'day, Derek. How are you, mate? If you can just give
yourself.
us 5 minutes to get through the preliminaries, we're pretty quickly into your area. So if you just want to go offline or something for a couple of moments, we'll be ready to have you on board pretty quick.
Okay, no problem.
Apart from that, while we have a number of external reports at this stage, we haven't anticipated having anybody such as David Seth, our internal auditor, present. I think we can deal with those things as we go through. It's a full agenda, but we do want to have a short time with Jane at the end of our meeting to deal with a couple of the key risks while we're looking at major change, reform and resource and delivery. So they're really important. And I suspect we will come across those also when we deal with the quarterly risk report. We might just try and be efficient as to which well, we need to deal with them at both, but recognising that there will be a session on those two risks, particularly at the end of the meeting. So, look, it's great to be here. Paul has put in an apology for an early departure. Are there any other apologies that we should sustain at this stage of the meeting? There being none, I'll move from the chair that we sustain Paul's apology for early departure. Do I have a seconder, please?
I can second that.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that. I'll put that all in favour. Please say aye.
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 Those against, it's carried. Thanks. No leaves of absences. Are there any matters on the agenda that we should note anybody's interests in? Being none, I haven't been informed of any public forum. Nothing's coming late. If that's ever admissible, Fiona, no?
No, nothing.
And are there any matters that we need to add to the agenda at this stage? No, that's good. It's full enough as it is, I guess. So that's wonderful. So look, item 6 is confirmation of the minutes, and we met for a good full day on the 11th of February. I'll move from the chair that they're accepted as a true and correct record. Do I have a seconder, please?
Happy to second
You
it.
able? Is there any matter in those minutes that need correction or updating? Pretty much like the meeting that I was at, so I was comfortable with it. If that's the case, and everybody else think, oh no, sorry, Rob. You got your hand up.
Just yeah, I was in attendance at that meeting, and that's just been missed on the front thing. So a little bit picky, but just yeah.
Sorry,
I'll add that. I'll just put that in for the copy that ends up in the minute books and on the web.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Rob. So we will certainly want to have that amendment made. Are there any other matters people need to raise? So subject to that, that amendment, which I think we can accept, Rob, will just actually occur. Can I put the motion, please, that we accept these as true and correct record? Those in favour, please say aye.
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 Thanks a lot. Those
Aye.
against? It's carried. Thank you. If we could move to item 7.1, which is the committee work plan. Emma, I suspect there's somewhere on it, and somebody will take us through this, please.
Good morning. Yes, good morning, Chair and Councillors.
G'day,
I'd like
Emma.
to present the Finance and Insurance Committee work plan for this current year. I'll take it as read, and I'll just briefly highlight some changes to this meeting that I'd like to bring your attention to. Some reports have been added or removed. The 2021 Davinci Trust Limited Independent Assurance Report has been added. This is normally done with the audit report, but due to resource constraints with Audit New Zealand, this has been done as a separate process this year. The Fund Manager Appointment Process Report's been added. This is to recommend to Council a short list of fund managers to manage our Council's investments. The impact on rates of approved unbudgeted expenditure report's been added. This is just to provide Council with an overview of the impact of rates up to and including this meeting. The update on audit action points report has been added. This is just further to the request to make this quarterly rather than every 6 months. And the proposal to change the internal audit program report has been added. This is to identify where council is most at risk of bribery and corruption as per the Audit New Zealand management letter. The 21-22 LGFA compliance overview has been removed. This will now be incorporated with the first monthly financial report of the year. There have also been 3 reports that have been deferred to June due to COVID impacts. The internal audit final report on project management and the 21-22 audit report, audit arrangements letter and the audit timetable. And I'd probably just like to remind councillors of the impact on COVID and resources. It's not just Audit New Zealand, it's also the NZTA external report, the internal road and audit provider, and of course Deloitte's. Hopefully with the borders opening, we'll start to have a pathway back to a bit more of a normal timetable. I'd like to answer any questions now.
Thank you, Emma, and I do appreciate the diligence in keeping us with an appropriate program. Members, are there any questions we've got for Emma? Makes sense. Looks for a good full agenda, so I appreciate that. I'd like to move to the motion, then, please, which is that we receive Emma's report and that we note the changes made. I'll move that from the chair. Do I have a seconder, please? A seconder, please. Thank you, John. Thank you. Is there any discussion on the motion? Being none, I'll put it, please. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those against?
Aye.
Very brilliant. Right, so now's a chance to formally welcome Derek Olsen, our Audit Director from Audit New Zealand. Derek, welcome along to this morning's meeting. Obviously, a couple of items here which will be really useful in fullness of time to have your comments on. But before we do that, looking at your report on last year's annual audit, Anne, is it Bree going to take us forward on this one, please, at this stage?
Yes. Thank you. Good morning,
G'day,
Mr. Chairman
Bree.
Committee. Hello, how are you? So today I will present the annual report management report from Audit New Zealand for the year end 30 June 2021. I will take this report as read, and as Derek has mentioned, as Bruce has mentioned, Derek Olsen, Audit New Zealand Audit Director, is in this meeting to answer any questions as needed. So as part of the audit process, Audit New Zealand provides council with a management report at the conclusion of the interim and final audits for the annual report. This report outlines the work that was performed and notes any recommended areas for improvement. The Audit New Zealand management report is included in attachment A and outlines both the new recommendations and open and closed recommendations from previous management reports. The management report referred to in this document relates to the results of the audit visit which occurred in November and December in 2021, when both interim and final audit procedures were undertaken. It discusses the key findings and areas for potential improvement, as well as summarises the outcomes of the matters raised in the audit plan, key matters for audits, and council's approach for adoption of new accounting standards. Management report also includes comments from council staff on each of the recommendations made by Audit New Zealand. Overall, from a staff perspective, it was a good audit report, emphasising issues more at a transactional level. As such, this provides assurance to council and the public that the information presented in the financial report, taken as a whole, reflects the financial position of council at 30 June 2021. It provides assurance that the systems and processes to collate this information are managed appropriately. There were 5 new areas identified by Audit New Zealand as part of the 2021 annual report audit process. These relate to creating a bribery and corruption policy, relates to parties and conflicts of interest, review of unit rates eroding assets, compliance with legislative requirements and sensitive expenditure controls. Council staff have already commenced implementing these recommendations and anticipate that these will be rectified within 12 months. In the report, it states 7 prior year recommendations have been implemented or closed over the past 12 months and 5 remain open. 1 further recommendation has since been closed when we're finalising the management report, with 4 remaining open. However, all of these are being actively managed. I will take any questions or Jason is also online, and Derek for any questions you may have now.
Thank you, Bree. Appreciate that. At this stage, I think it would be useful if I invited Derek, Bree, just to give us the perspective from his view, and then I'll open it up to questions, including Jason, if you've got points you wish to make. So, Derek, welcome. I'd be very keen to hear your thoughts on what you remember and reflect on from last year.
Thank you, Bruce. Morning, committee members, morning, management. Yes, I think as Bree highlighted, there was a very standard audit. Went well. Some key items that we highlighted in our executive summary was probably the main issue around the Palmerston North call centre, which was still an issue from the prior year, which was only corrected during the audit process. So I think going forward, from discussions with management, it seems that has been resolved subsequently. But I think for next year's audit, we'll need to see how that will impact the qualification that still remained in the prior year and in the current year, and to what extent that will be able to be corrected going forward, and whether there will be an impact on a prior year audit opinion or how that will be managed during this year's audit. So that's maybe just on that specific item that was still an issue during the audit, where we did spend quite a bit of time to work through that area. Other than that, I think the council does do annual valuations. We looked at the valuation work and we were quite happy with that. We did pick up some unit rates that were not in line with contract rates. So that's also something that management probably need to focus on to ensure that for this year's valuation, the value fairly reflects, or the carrying value fairly reflects fair value. We did pick up in some councils that do not annually value their financial assets, or their assets, that there are quite large movements that we see in the environment currently. So I think that's something that management just needs to be aware of. As Bree also mentioned, the number of new recommendations, open recommendations, closed recommendations, I think that's a good trend that we are seeing. Quite a lot of recommendations closed, very few still open, and a limited number of new recommendations, which is also quite pleasing to see. So I think with that, I'll pause there for questions. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you, Derek. Appreciate that. And to both Derek and Bree, thank you for your comments that it's been a reasonably straightforward audit, which I appreciate, and it sounds like it's been conducted in pretty good humour, which is in a challenging environment not to be taken as a given. So thank you for that. John, you've got a question.
Yes, thank you, Bruce, and Derek, thank you. So just in relation to the Palmerston North call centre, this one has been hanging around for a while, and if I summarise it and get it wrong, you'll correct me, but is it around RFSs that were lodged at the Palmerston North call centre that should have been elevated to complaints but weren't? Is that the crux of the matter?
Yeah, so they send through RFSs that you log on your system, and you didn't determine whether it's a request for information or whether it's a request for service. So there were confusion and different information being provided through from the Palmerston North call centre that didn't allow you to capture it correctly on your side, and that created the confusion in terms of the completeness of RFSs, whether the number of RFSs is in fact complete, whether it's a request for information, whether it's a request for service.
Okay, so what sort of arrangement do we have with the Palmerston North call centre? Do we have a contract? If we do, and hopefully we do, was there a breach in the contract? Was there something that was misunderstood in the contract? And then it has involved extra fees, and should that be at SDC's door, or should it be at the Palmerston North call centre's cost?
I wonder if in the first instance thank you. Jason's got his hand up. So let's, Jason, perhaps you could help us with understanding the rules and then I can come back to you, Derek, on the fee.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just, I guess, a couple of things going back. We just obviously discussed this in a fair level of detail when we adopted the annual report back in December. The biggest thing I think with the PNCC issue is it's been an evolving issue. Originally, it started out as a issue around how like some of the complaints were being categorised, so they were all kept under 1-3 waters. 1-3 waters category. Part of that was then split them out into stormwater, water supply, and wastewater, which has then occurred. Then it evolved into a issue around how some of the complaints were being recorded. So whether they were recorded one issue and then a follow-up call, whether that was an additional complaint or whether it was connected to the first existing call. So we worked through with PNCC to alter our business rules around that to ensure that we were capturing then each call. And then through, as Derek's already outlined, then through this process, again, this PNCC issue began to evolve further into understanding around how requests for information were being captured. The RFS, so the request for service, our understanding anyway is that they were coming through. There was still some error, I guess some room for error in terms of whether they were fully coming through, and that's the completeness that Derek talked about, because it is a call centre and how calls are closed off can impact on that. But the issue that we have understood is that the requests for further information, they were just closed off by the call centre and they weren't recorded and then passed through to SDC because they weren't considered to be of a nature that needed further to be dealt with any further than the existing call. The understanding again is that that creates a completeness risk. So council has now worked with PNCC to change that rule so that all calls now are recorded, passed through. Urgent ones are still going through to Downer to be worked with, and any other requests for information calls are being captured and then sent through to SDC so that we have entire completeness now around the issue going forward. Just on John's point, yeah, again, we do have a contract for service with PNCC. I'm not sure how easy it is to go through that. And again, that's why I wanted to highlight the evolving issue from a PNCC point of view. I think there's been for different councils, the interpretation of the PNCC capture issue has been different, but this is our understanding, working with audit through this previous process and now ensuring that we're able to hopefully move on and get rid of this issue, which is, in terms of the overall management report, is a very small part of our overall work.
Thanks. And I want to, John, I could probably just add a wee bit of my personal experience, which is there are about 19 councils plus that work through this PNCC centre with all individual contracts, as I understand it, plus individual rules, albeit that the rules should be relatively standard across the councils because we're trying to actually measure the same thing. But Jason, if I understand it correctly, this was a case of us as in Southland District Council needing to establish our rules with PNCC, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So that was reasonably important. Jason, my follow-up before I invite Derek to talk about the fee is the paper says fixed in February 2022. Does this mean that the current year's set of measurements will be okay and you know, all things being fair, not subject to audit qualification? So we have got the current year right. In other words, you'd be able to go back to 1 July last year to get this correct?
Probably not. I think because we've got this again, because this additional, I guess, completeness issue only came through in the November, December, because there's no those records or the calls for requesting further information aren't logged and kept, we aren't able to go back to those. So I guess from an audit point of view, and Derek may be able to clarify that, there would still be some element of completeness that exists from the period of 1st of July through to December, I would imagine. So
this matter's going to dog us in terms of our opinion for the current year, let alone the comparative figure at this stage would seem to be the position. Right, Derek, fee, how much are you asking the OAG to be able to recover?
I think in comparison to our total fee, it's less than 10% of our overrun. It's around 5K that we'll be requesting from the OAG for approval. So I think, going through, we probably thought it would be a lot more, but it's I think that's quite contained and reasonable in light of our total overrun, the 5K that we are requesting.
Right, well, it's obviously subject to negotiation once you get the approval and come back to Anne. Yes. So thank you for that advice. Yes, Gary.
I just can't believe the amount of time that was spent on this with everything else that the team do. It's fails in significance to what we have achieved, and it comes down to a fault of someone else, not our team. But yeah, I just can't believe the amount of time we've spent on this subject. And if it's across the board, then, as I've said before, sack them and move on. But yeah, in regards to the fee, Derek, it is what it is. But it's you say it's only 5K, but to our ratepayers, it's a hell of a lot of money compared to everything else that we're adding on at the moment. That's end of my rant, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And it's important to be able to express feelings as well as also opinions. Thank you. Any other views that we should take in, or questions of Derek or Bree at this stage? Yes, Abel.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just like some assurance from Jason that the process that we're going through now, albeit the history, we'll park that, but where we're going to, that this will actually resolve the problem once and for all, that we're not going to re-look at this issue again in 12 months' time. I want some assurance that we're actually going to put a line in the sand and we're going to get it sorted.
Just through the chair, thanks for that, Councillor Kramer. I think to this point, we're trying to, we've put, as Gary's actually outlined, we've put a lot of resource into trying to work with audit ourselves to understand and try and sign off this issue. And we believe that now we have facilitated a process, or got instigated a process and changed our business rules with PNCC to deliver on that. Again, though it just does seem to be an evolving issue for such a small component of our work program for KPIs. We have very little calls going through the Palmerston North City call centre, and our performance in terms of our KPIs has actually been really good, which at the management, at the adoption, we learned too from Monique that it actually hurts our margin of error because we have so little complaints around our KPIs regarding this. But we believe at this point that we have got that process now in place, and hopefully we can move on and focus on other things as part of our audits going forward.
Thank you for that. It's good.
It may well be worthwhile, once we've got this solved, the chance just to work through, does it warrant the cost of the contract somewhere further down the track, Jason? But I hear your point that at the moment we've got to do what they are, who they are. We've probably got a contract in place. We need to see how it goes, but it may well influence how we think things through. I had a couple of questions, please, if that's okay. Bree or Anne, I'm hearing, things have gone well between for both the annual report preparation, but also the audit. So thanks for that. Is there anything that we've learned out of this year's exercise that will help us in terms of this current year, isn't this coming financial year, balance and audit process?
I think from my point of view, we'll be extremely grateful that the borders are open and hopefully Audit New Zealand can get some more resourcing into the country to be able to help our position going forward, because that's something that Derek might like to comment on, is the annual report process and perhaps the timing around that, because that does have a major impact on our resourcing and ability to try and get everything done.
Derek, is there anything you can give us an update on position of your team and resourcing? I know it's been incredibly challenging 2 or 3 years.
Yes, I mean, as you know, the Parliament approved a 2-year extension to deadlines when the OAG approached Parliament last year for an extension to deadlines. So this year, the deadline is still extended up until the end of December. And while we are still busy with a capacity building process, we will be fully utilising the extent of that extension of the legislative window. So I think the timing of the audit might be very similar to what we had last year. I'm not familiar with the details of what's sitting currently on the resource board. But you know, it is also evolving because Omicron does have an impact on our staffing and resourcing, as we currently see with audits where staff become ill, that it's impacting the work that they're currently doing. So that has a flow-on impact on audits later on in the year. But you know, we'll set up meetings with management to discuss the timing and discuss risks and issues for this year so that we can start preparing an audit plan for this year's audit.
So look, I think I was going to raise it at the end. At the moment, we don't actually have an audit plan for this year, do we, Derek? But I presume that will be with us pretty soon.
Yes, Bruce.
What soon?
Well, we need to engage with management, and I'm sure before your next audit committee meeting, we'll have a draft audit plan ready.
Yeah, well, we're 2 or 3 months away from the next meeting, so to be honest, I would expect it, but that's fine. Appreciate that, but I would be keen to see it, because I think, again, it's a classic case, picking up on Gary's point. It's a very important process to make certain that we've got an external sign-off, but equally we want to find that we devote the right level of energy to it, not an extraordinary amount of energy, given actually the many other things that I know the management team have on and going into place. It's not a criticism of you, but it's actually just the sooner you can tell us what the agreed plans are with Anne, and Anne, I'll be keen for you to keep us informed as well, the better off we will be. Can I just ask one other final set of questions, please? I'm always interested to know what's outstanding and actually what is the nature of them. Anne or Bree, I just wonder, it says it's beneficial here, but we've got no formal disaster recovery plan in place. This is on page 58 of our agenda. And we talk about simulation, I think, but we don't necessarily have the actual plan. How significant? It says the recommendation is beneficial, but it sounds mildly important. We need to look at our friends up the road in Tairāwhiti, if it's civil defence, but equally if it's IT, that's an ongoing heightened risk at the moment. Can we tell us where that's at, please? I know that we might come to this when we get to the latest item in the paper, but I just wanted to know whether there was any quick comment on that.
So in regards to it, it is actually heightened more around IT. Right. I believe they've been working closely with other councils to do some work around that. I don't know if Matt's around at all, but he may have some more information on that area than possibly I do, other than what the comment is in there.
Well, can I reflect? Don't worry, Matt. If I can just signal, seeing I have raised it. When we get to the outstanding recommendations, there is a bit around IT security, and perhaps I will, for the sake and efficiency of the meeting, bring that up at that point when we start looking at what are the nature of the outstanding recommendations and where we're at. Thank you for that. Is there any other questions, folk, for Derek or anything else here, or can I move to the recommendation?
If I could, please.
Yeah, Paul, go for it.
Just regarding the outstanding issues in that one pertaining to the bribery and corruption policy review. So I noticed that there's now a need for some emphasis to be put on the bribery and corruption aspect of it. I assume that there's some very good policies around the country that you must know of that perhaps might save us a lot of time if we were perhaps pointed in that direction rather than sort of having to go through inventing a wheel ourselves. Would that be a fair comment or not?
You talking to me or to Derek?
To Derek, really, and yourself, Bruce, I guess.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, we do have best practice guidance also available, and I'm sure we'll have, we can reflect on other councils that have good policies in place, but we normally issue best practice guidance. So when we do make recommendations, it's from that best practice advice, which then, we highlight and which can then be incorporated into your policy.
Well, this will also come up later when we talk about internal audit. So keep your question in mind. Actually, ironically, it's probably ironic. I always say being borrow and steal other people's policies, probably not appropriate when it comes to fraud and corruption, but there we go. I agree and sympathise entirely with your approach. It makes sense. Thank you for that,
Thank
Paul.
you.
Any other questions?
Just a parting comment, Mr. Chair. And all in all, it's a very, very good audit,
Yeah.
and it's a top marks to the team. They're under considerable pressure work-wise, as well as sticking to policies, et cetera, and conforming. So, no, very, very happy with it.
Agreed. Thank you for that, Gary. And I think that's a very good note to conclude the discussion on. So if I could move to the recommendation, which is, I just lost it. It's on page 28. Which is that we receive Derek's report and indeed the staff report that's on it. I'll move that from the chair. Do I have a seconder, please?
I'll
Second that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Gary. I think it's your voice I heard. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? It's carried. Right, Bree, the limited independent assurance on the Davinci Trustee, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. So today I will present the Limited Independent Assurance Report of the Davinci Trustee for the year ended 30 June 2021. I will take this report as read. The purpose of this report is to provide an overview of Audit New Zealand's Limited Independence Assurance Report of Council's Davinci Trustee for the year end 30 June 2021. Audit New Zealand conducted a limited independent assurance engagement of Council's Davinci Trustee on the 17th of February 2022, as required under section 12.2.6 of the Davinci Trustee between Council and Covenant Trustee Services, who are Council's trustee under the Davinci Trustee. The purpose of this engagement is to provide assurance over the Davinci Trust reporting certificate and associated documents for the year end 30 June 2021. The limited independence insurance engagement of Council's Davinci Trustee is typically conducted at the same time as Audit New Zealand's as the audit of Council's annual report. However, due to staffing resource shortages within Audit New Zealand, this engagement was conducted separately in February 2022, hence why we've brought a separate report up on their report. Audit New Zealand reported that no issues were identified during the review. A copy of the Limited Independence Assurance Report and associated signed representation letter is included for your information in attachments A and B of the report. I'll take any questions you will have.
Thank you for that. Reasonably important little report, but a small one. Derek, is there anything you need to say about your limited assurance review?
No, Bruce, I think from our side, it's as you say, a fairly standard report, nothing exceptional to highlight.
Thank you. Any questions from members at this stage? I think it's important just to reflect that there are requirements on us if we wish to utilise debt, and it's indeed having a Davinci Trust sitting alongside. So in fact, the declarations that Cameron's made, and I'd refer you to page 73 of the agenda, are really important. Cameron signed his life away. No, he hasn't. Joke. He's importantly had to sign reasonably serious certificates, which actually are really important, that we do know who the stock is. We've met all our commitments against the stock. and there has been no action taken against us. It's actually quite an important declaration to make. And we have Derek's limited assurance, so he's saying nothing's come to my attention that suggests that hasn't been the case. That's important to note. So it is actually reasonably important, albeit pretty operational. Right, I wonder if there's no questions, can I then move us to the recommendation, please, on page 65, which is that we receive the limited independent assurance report on the Davinci Trustee.
Happy to second. Yeah.
Pardon?
Happy to
move,
second.
thank you. I'll second. Thank you very much. If there's no discussion, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Those against? It's carried. Thank you. Hey, Derek, thank you for that. Appreciate that. Obviously, it's good to have this wraps up last year. I just want to reflect on what you said at the end, Gary. Thank you to firstly staff, particularly to you, Derek, under some pretty trying circumstances. I know that you still face resourcing issues, and that will be a challenge for any early sign-off this year. But I do encourage everybody with our support to work closely with each other to get there. And we'll be keen to know those plans pretty soon, even though we won't be meeting for a time yet. So I would appreciate knowing those plans soonish. Thank you very much for your work, Derek, and I'll leave you with get on with the rest of your day if you wish. And
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, committee members.
Thanks, Derek.
Cheers, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Derek.
Can we move to the building re-accreditation interim report? This is an important one for us, given the results. So item 7.4. Julie, have we got Julie, or is it going to be Matt speaking to this?
Good morning, you have Julie.
G'day, Julie, you sound a long way away.
Oh, do I?
Yeah.
I'll try to project my voice a bit more.
Oh, that's better. That's a lot better. Suddenly picked up.
Okay.
Welcome.
Must be the microphone. Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, committee. I'm very pleased to present this report. This is our building interim assessment accreditation report. Under the Building Act 2004, we are required to have regular assessments through IANZ, the International Accreditation New Zealand, to ensure that the Building Control Authority is maintaining and complying with all aspects of the regulations for building. I will take this report as read. I'm delighted to share the highlights with you though before I take some questions. This was an interim assessment, so it wasn't a full assessment across all aspects of what my team does and all aspects of the regulation. This was focusing primarily on the previous assessment and the areas that we were found a bit lacking in. We actually had a really positive experience with this assessment. IANZ were very complimentary on the work and the progress that the BCA had achieved in the previous 12 months. And they noted a few points of excellence even, or best practice of procedures that our team are following and have established. So that was really positive. We do have 7 non-conformances that we are working on. The topics of those non-conformances though were recognised by IANZ that we'd made significant progress. We just needed a little bit more time to embed some new procedures and ensure absolute compliance before they could sign those off. As far as the outcome of this report, we have been considered a low risk BCA, which means we would go back to the regular biannual audit, assuming next year's audit again retains that low risk assessment. And of the 7 non-conformances found during the assessment, 1 was cleared during the assessment. So the team and I are working on clearing the remaining 6, which we have until just after mid-May 2022. Quite happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Julie. Totally reinforced your point that this is a good news story. To be assessed as low risk shouldn't be taken, well, it's what we want, but it shouldn't be taken for granted. And obviously you've had to do some work to get there, so appreciate that. Yes, Abel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and also a good report, great result. I do like to know under section number 20, costs and funding. I do see that it is within the allocated budget, but it would be useful just to know what sort of costs are involved in doing these sorts of audits. So you can come back to me on, you can come
Anybody-
back to me on that later on and just advise as to what sort of costs are actually involved in doing those sort of audits. Thank you.
Thanks, Abel. Yes, John.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. Yeah, just on page 78.7, it does say 11% of BCAs were assessed as being demonstrated with one or more serious non-compliance. I would have thought that was relatively high, but you know, can you just give me a sense of what is acceptable and what is sort of getting close to breaking the line?
Through you, Mr. Chair. A serious non-conformance under this accreditation scheme typically refers to where you have a repeat non-conformance and you have not, in the time since your previous audit, sufficiently and repetitively addressed and corrected a non-conformance that was found prior. The biannual report that came out through MB showed that at the start of the scheme, when the 2004 Building Act came into place, requiring quality assurance across BCAs, there was a lot of effort put in by a lot of BCAs to get those procedures correct, get the quality checks in place, and perform at a standard of excellence. Once that was attained, it was seen that many BCAs started to drop that level of quality assurance and that repeat level of excellence. And that was one of the concerns raised in that MB biannual report, was that they were seeing that that amazing effort that everyone had put in right at the start was not being maintained. So that was seen as the primary reason that so many serious non-conformance had been realised. There is also quite a focus on compliance schedules and specified systems in buildings with IANZ accreditations. Up until recently, there was no guidance that was specific to the forms and the requirements within a compliance schedule for a BCA to work towards and comply with. And so we were all interpreting that legislation and those requirements in slightly different ways. IANZ was seeing a level of inconsistency. And as we evolved as a BCA and as we worked with the industry, there was a need for an exemplar or a template compliance schedule to be produced. That's recently been produced by MB, and so BCAs now have a much better opportunity to attain absolute compliance with the expectations set on them.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
Thank you, Julie. Is there any other questions for Julie? Could I, so questions asked totally in the context that these are minor non-conformances. Okay, so I totally take that on board. The lens I look at a typical accountant is when I look at item 16 or paragraph 16, which has the key issues, which we again acknowledging are minor. I tend to look at this from the perspective which of these could come back and bite us. In other words, what might be building a future liability for us as a BCA? Clearly, any consent could have that risk, but given there are some recommendations there, are any of those recommendations particularly relevant when I consider what are the potential future liabilities we could be building up through our decision-making process?
Absolutely, great question. One or two of the things that IANZ picked up was our knowledge of our own system and the way that actually delivers the functions that we understand it does. And so one of those, I suppose, risks that we as a team are now mitigating is a further deep dive into the way our systems work to ensure that they protect us against some of those findings, like operating without the appropriate competency having already been achieved and some of the signatory sign-off memos going missing. We didn't realise that was even possible in our system. So I suppose one of those key risks that we've taken away and really recognised as a positive opportunity from this audit is to actually really understand that system a lot more, not just trust what the vendor has told us is going to happen with that system, but to actually really understand it, test it at all aspects, and have absolute confidence that it is doing what it needs to be doing.
Okay, look, no, appreciate that. Look at it, obviously this is something which you're going to face, albeit good news, but the next audit reasonably soon. It'll be something that I'd like you just to keep in mind as when you come back, Julie, with I'm sure a very successful 23 audit. actually what is building potentially our future liabilities, because it's always the unknown, isn't it, that worries us. So getting the inputs right in this case is really important. So I appreciate that. Right, I don't think there's any other questions. Everybody else has got their hands up. Can I move to page 77 of the agenda, which has got our recommendations, which is that we receive the staff report. We have making decisions appropriately with the Act, and we note the report and associated deterrence action plan, which I appreciate that we've got here, Julie. I'll move that. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, John. I'll put that. Oh, any discussion on the motion? I'll put it then. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Vote against? It's carried. Thank you, Julie. Appreciate your time. That's very helpful and good news that we're on the right track.
Thank you.
Can I move to item 7.5, which is the quarterly update? Jane, I'm sure you're there. Oh, there's Jane. Welcome. Nice to see you this morning. We're in your hands.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, councillors. So the purpose of my report is to submit the March 22 risk report for your consideration. Council's top risks have been reviewed by the leadership team, and any areas of issue have been detailed in the report. I'll take as read. So the COVID-19 pandemic has continued to shape much of the reporting over the quarter. As we've transitioned to having COVID in the community, councils look to mitigate impacts both on the organisation as a whole and also on its ability to continue delivering for our communities. So the incident management team have continued to manage council's response as the government's introduced new measures. The development of a prioritised list of critical services has enabled mitigations to be put in place to protect our ability to operate effectively. We've done this by identifying and protecting our key functions, whilst also identifying which projects could potentially be stalled. Staff wellbeing continues to be monitored, and communication channels have been used to share information throughout the organisation. So work on this risk over the last quarter has been in it rather than on it. However, staff have continued to develop what this risk is going to look like going forwards, and this will be approved by the leadership team and presented to the committee next quarter. The change and reform risk continues assessed as worsening. Council will need to continue to keep abreast of decisions from central government, and outside of that, it remains essential that we continue to position ourselves effectively so that we are able to influence any implications going forwards for the district. Similarly, the resource and delivery risk area continues assessed as worsening, both from ongoing pressures on the economy due to COVID and also the escalating situation in Ukraine. So much of the change and reform risk, a number of these risk drivers are out of council's direct control. However, mitigations are continuing, including building flexibility into a work program and exploring more agile procurement opportunities, for example, and also looking to see where external resourcing or collaboration could benefit the delivery of our work program. So as Bruce mentioned earlier, these last two risks will be the subject of a workshop later. However, the leadership team and I are happy to answer any questions that you may have now. So thank you.
Thank you, Jane. A very comprehensive report. Always like diagrams, can't beat them. Okay, questions for Jane, please. Or indeed for the management team, as Jane's quite rightly put out, this is a combined leadership team responsibility, and I do appreciate that fact. Wonder if I could just start with a couple then, and I just wonder, Cameron, I think you're on the line somewhere. Jane's spoken eloquently about COVID-19. You tend to be in the hot seat. I wonder if there's any comment you'd like to make. And the other question I had was around the operational risk assurance, which seems to have been delayed, and I think it's probably because of what we're about to talk about, COVID. I take that. I'm just wondering if we have a forward sense of when that might be able to be nailed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, the COVID response has been run through IMT, and it feels a little like the earlier discussion about disaster preparedness. We've gone into the COVID response, and in my view, managed it as well as anybody can, given that there's no script for it. We've been by separating the organisation into groups and roughly following the red guidelines. We've got a comparatively low level of infection in the organisation. There are obviously the same risks that everybody faces with the external vectors, such as school kids. But we're doing pretty well in respect to continuing our service levels and managing to keep operating pretty effectively.
Good, appreciate that. Is there any comment somebody could make around the future planning to get the operational risk register running properly?
Through you, Mr. Chair, and I'm sure Cameron can speak to this too. We do have some staffing issues which are impacting on that at the moment. It is something that has had to be put on hold at present time, but the work will continue on this as soon as we're able.
Thank you. Any other questions for Jane at this stage, guys? Oh, guys, it's wrong. Sorry. You notice you're there, Julie, as well. My apologies.
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Paul.
Paul here. I just wonder, Jane, I mean, it's easy to sit around horrified at possibilities of what might happen perhaps in the world at the moment. I just noticed, regarding cyber security and sort of media warnings being printed that Russia's likely to step up its activity in that line. I'm just wondering, do we need some extra vigilance, or are our systems as good as they can be?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the IT team are very aware of the increase in alerts and warnings that are coming out of the agencies that we're dealing with. However, nothing substantial has happened yet. They are comfortable with where our systems are at the moment in terms of dealing with what we can anticipate.
Thank you. And the other one, of course, the other one would be the disaster event aspect. I think weather events only seem to happen in disasters nowadays. And we've been lucky so far since our floods in February 2020. But I think we've got to be aware that, whatever happens nowadays seems to be much more extreme than it used to be. And that might be the new future. But I mean, you've got it well noted there.
Yes, we're trying to, sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, we're maintaining our response levels as necessary so that we can deal with that if anything happens.
Yes, John.
Yeah, thank you. Jane, as a councillor, we're still getting spam emails from people that we shouldn't be. I won't go any more than that. What protection are we able to put in place? What efforts have been put in place to try and eliminate those particular emails?
I'm not sure whether we have if Jock's on this meeting. I think that it's probably best if he gets back to you, if that's okay, Councillor. I can certainly pass that on. Oh, Matt.
Oh, through you, Mr. Chair, I guess I'd just add that efforts are ongoing in that arena, Councillor Douglas. And I guess I'd say that the perpetrators, if you'd like to call them that, of spam emails are frequently always looking for ways of overcoming and getting past systems. And on the inverse side of things, we're constantly looking for ways to defend against those phishing spam emails, most of which are harmless and advertising, but some obviously more sinister in nature. But we're continuing and always to build defences and remain agile to threats as they evolve. But I dare say it's something we'll always be reacting to, certainly in the foreseeable.
Thank you. Matt, I do think, by the way, and I know I'm partly sponsoring it, but I think it would be timely to say that I'm wondering whether we shouldn't. No, that's a double negative. I would appreciate it. Perhaps the next meeting we consider having Jock report to us on where things are at with cybersecurity. It's not my greatest part of my wheelhouse, but I am conscious that when I look at a number of things in this report, I wonder whether, and I'll come to it when we get to the outstanding recommendations. I just wonder whether it would be worthwhile for that sort of regular check-in we've had with Jock. Paul, you raised a good issue. Clearly, there have been warnings out there. Elsewhere, I'm seeing statistics which remain that only a less than 50% percentage of our emails are valid. And John, the biggest issue around phishing emails are ourselves. It's a human factor rather than a system factor. So again, I'd love to know from Jock what we're doing, for instance, with processes around things like test phishing emails, the friendly fire, which is to see whether in fact we are able ourselves to not fall into the trap. There are some of those things that I think it's getting to the point where it would be good to ask that at perhaps next meeting Jock might care to be present, and we'd try and just pick up a more effective review across this risk would be helpful.
For you, Mr. Chairman, Jock and I have been discussing just recently how we might look to elevate this issue to governance, in particular finance and assurance. We've been discussing either a regular report or a quarterly workshop. So more than happy to ensure that Jock's available next meeting, either via a report or a specific discussion.
Appreciate that, Matt. That'd be really helpful. Members, anything else you'd like to ask? We obviously have a session with Jane, which I'm very keen we give reasonable time to, around probably two of the real key areas on us at the moment, which is reform and also indeed resource and delivery, which are critical to our plans for this year, let alone next year. So if there are no other questions, I'd like to move to the recommendation, please, on page 116. Received the report, we have met the requirements of the Act, and we endorse the risks considered as significant, being reported to Council at its 27th April meeting. So again, thank you for that recommendation, Jane. Actually, it is really important that all councillors see what we think are big and where those ratings are. So I'll be very keen to see that recommendation through. I'll move from the chair. Do we have a seconder, please? Thank you, Abel. Appreciate that. Is there any discussion on the motion? Being none, I'll put it then, please. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Jane. Appreciate that. We'll see you a bit later. Can I go to item 7.6, which is the interim performance report, period 2, 1 July through 28 Feb. Thank you. Shannon.
Mr. Chair, Jason's looking after us with that report today.
Jason's looking after us. Okay. Jason, how are you, buddy?
Apologies from Shannon. You will be stuck with me today. Thank you. And I will take the report as read. This report presents the results of the second interim performance report for your information for this financial year. Listed in the report are the key performance indicators or KPIs, agreed targets, and the results against those targets. There are a total of 58 KPIs. KPI results are put into the annual report, to report back to our community on how well we did against our targets for the year. This set of KPIs is measured against the LTP 2021 to 2031. For the reporting period from a total of 58 KPIs, the results show that 79% or 42 were achieved, 13% or 7 KPIs were not achieved, and 8% or 4 were near target. 5 KPIs are not measured until the end of the year and have been excluded from the results to this point. In the report, we've listed 11 KPIs that were not achieved or near target, and we have identified any that pose a risk to council in paragraph 6. We've also listed all of these 11 within the report. The next report will be in August and will show the final period for the financial year. Happy to take any questions or have some discussion around this. And I've also got a leadership team and some of our key activity managers on board too, so we can hopefully respond to any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate that. And I see Gary's away from his camera at the moment. So perhaps if I can try and anticipate what Gary would say is we need to remember that the majority of the targets are actually being achieved. I suspect we're about to deal with those that aren't or are only near misses, whereas in fact the great majority are being done. So well done to the team. In fact, I would like to come back to a question to you, Cameron, if I can just put it that about the idea that we need to keep close to our knitting and getting things done. This is an evidence of it. I'd be keen to have that at the end. But let's remember that a good lot of work is being done and we are achieving our targets, which is a superb news item. Can I ask members, are there any questions for Jason or indeed the staff that are assembled? Thank you for managing that, Jason. There are none.
Sorry.
Well, I have got some, Jason. I can't.
Sorry, I had to duck off there.
Meeting. Well, sorry, Gary. Did you have questions?
No, that's all right. I just I was listening. I was just putting the dog out.
Good. Look, can I just ask a question? The first one I looked at was the maintenance of the sealed local road network. And just thinking that 6.5% is I guess about 15%. My math is correct of the network get done every year. So it is important to achieve it if we're thinking about, I presume, what is maintenance of the top seal. We've noted this as being at some risk, and yet we're still projecting to be at 6.2%. How significant is that miss by 0.3% in reality for the long-term revolving nature of our reseal program? So do you, Matt, or somebody that could help me with that, please?
Hartley's going to come in and answer that one.
Oh, Hartley's going to do that. Welcome, Hartley. Good to see you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So obviously for that margin, there's not a significant risk to the network, but it's if we continue with that margin over a sustained period of time is when that risk will increase. The one-off, I wouldn't classify it as a significant risk, but sustained underinvestment or underachieving of that would become a major risk.
If I've been a good boy, I would have gone back to last year's report. I mean, I hear your point. This could be, death by 1,000 cuts rather than a big hit. Have we got a record or at least a trend of not quite meeting our targets?
No, we haven't. We do have a record in terms of we have successfully achieved this target continuously for numerous years.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So it's more a little red flag worth watching, particularly when we get to the end of the season. But equally, going back, you're really confirming my point that it may not be a big number, but actually, if it was to continue over time, we would face trouble. So look, just in terms of sort of the root cause, you say it could be weather or bitumen prices. It can't be the weather, mate. It's not in Te Anau. We're in Lincoln Sahara. You'll be able to reseal for your heart's content. What are the root causes of getting to 6.3 rather than 6.5?
Yeah, so for this season, it's predominantly around the cost index increases, but also the types of treatments. So different treatments carry different dollar values. So through the long-term plan, we applied for $5.5 million worth of funding for this activity. We got around $5.3 million. So from the get-go, we're slightly under. And then also some of the treatments that we're applying to is generally our chip sealing, and we expect to achieve that. And that's a lower cost. We pay somewhere around the vicinity of, or currently around $6.50 as an average for a square meter. But there's also some higher wear sites where we need to put down asphalt, and that comes at a much greater cost.
Yeah.
But obviously the budget hasn't changed. So those are sort of all factors that are influencing achieving the overall program.
Look, I'm sure Abel's committee keeps you to the I guess, the wheel on this one for full analysis. I'm just interested to know from a risk perspective what our performance might be. And again, we'll come back to that this afternoon. We start talking resource and delivery. So I appreciate that that piece of advice. The one other question then I had. It was water supply on page 161. So I don't know, Jace, whether you, I lead with you. When we have a fault response time, we have a target of 6 and we hit 6.57. I take it that's an average of all our call-outs. So some people might be experiencing substantially more time than that, and others it might be a reasonably short time. Is that correct?
It is correct. My understanding is that there was one response time that was over, and that's affecting the average. I'm not sure whether Grant's on the call or not, but it has been affected by that one call. But over the time, there's a level of confidence, I think, that we can hopefully get back to very close to getting under that response time over the period of the year.
Can you hear me?
Yes, certainly can, Grant. Welcome to the meeting.
Yeah,
Appreciate you.
No worries. Yeah, there was one call that was called in for a minor for a start, so that had a different response time, and when we got out there, it was elevated to a higher level, so that also had an impact. So I think with what Jason said, and one of them being in that category, I think we'll be quite comfortable with getting back down to where we should be in the future. One was also a very complicated repair, and that had an impact, and one was a very difficult location. So just whether in the network, sometimes when you're right at the far reaches, you might just take a bit to get there. You know about it, but by the time you get there and record that you've got there in time, it can be a bit of a stretch.
Appreciate that, Grant. And that's just, again, useful to know what lies behind the statistic rather than actually just saying it's close or not. Appreciate the fact that you say 6.57, then convert that to minutes for me. Appreciate that. That's good. Okay, members, is there any other questions? I've had a good chance. Is there any other questions that people would like to raise in this performance report? There are none? Okay, well done. Now let me go back to my comments, which I think I would try to paraphrase you, Gary. Well done on the achievement. That's good. Sorry, there was one question. Sorry, I was going to. Poor old Cameron, I'm coming back to you, mate. Typical chair, trying to put you under pressure. No. Cameron, I just, in terms of the general view that our resourcing needs to focus on core business that we've agreed in the plan. This plan says that things are trucking on at a reasonable speed. These are sorts of results that you're comfortable with relative to the broader theme of keeping to our knitting, doing the things that really count.
Mr. Chair, yes, thank you, it does. Noting that it, of course, goes up to the end of February and there's a number of things, particularly the dry climate conditions for the next period, we might see some challenges in terms of an increase in the volume of calls around water supply. But when we went into the COVID response change in late January, when it became clear that we were going to be dealing with Omicron, we've put in a pretty concerted effort to make sure that we were focusing on the core and important stuff first. Obviously, Three Waters gets right up in there. Stormwater is not much of a problem for us at the moment, but the other two we're right up there, and we said things like, and to come back to your earlier subject. Things that would be really nice to have, but we might not just be able to focus on, like the deep dive into risk. We said, look, we're going to have to be a bit strategic about which things are going to get our attention. So, look, I'm actually pretty chuffed with that. I think that's a good result. And you know, I did hear your comment about the resealing, and you could really go for it at the moment because the weather's so good. But some of the lead up to Christmas actually wasn't that flash. And so we are just, it's important to remember we're seeing it in the period that it actually occurred. So,
I appreciate that. And actually, can I say, perhaps I was a bit facetious about the weather. But what I was really interested in was the root cause, and I did appreciate Hartley's answer, but actually it comes down to the nuances of the funding system that we operate under, which presumably means that there's pressure on the agility of our procurement services to be able to try and achieve a program with reduced funding and in effect the 5.3 rather than the 5.5, which is something that I think as a finance committee as well as a risk committee we should keep our eye on. I'm sure you are able. So it's very interesting moving feast. So thank you for that, Cameron. Appreciate that. Can I move us to the recommendations then, please, on page 154, which is that we simply receive a report. It's actually, Jason, can I just say to you and to Shannon, thank you. I'm always conscious this is good data, it's good information, we have a good discussion. It always feels like in some ways our discussion undercooks it. So hopefully we've got to some reasonable key points with you on this one. So thank you. So I'll move that we receive the report. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, John. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? It's carried. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Right, Bree, you're back again doing the hard yards today on the financial report to 31 January, please.
Yes, good morning again, Mr. Chair, committee members. Today I will present the financial report for the period to 31 January 2022. I will take this report as read. We'll provide a wee summary of the report now. The purpose of this report is to provide the Finance and Assurance Committee with an overview of the financial results for the 7 months to 31 January 2022. Operating income is 3.5 million below projection year to date. Some of the reasons for these variances are the corporate services income is lower than projection, largely due to investment income being lower than budget. Council staff and its advisors are now working to recommend to finance insurance potential fund managers, and you have a report on this later today. Stormwater income is 890,000 or 38% lower than projection. Although we've received the stimulus grant monies, we're not recognising it as income until the costs are incurred. The recognition of this income was phased at the start of the financial year to match the expected timing of the stimulus project costs. The project's still on track to be completed. The projects are still on track to be completed by 30 June 2022, and the income will continue to be released when this work's completed. Operating expenditure is 4.7 million below projection for the year to date. Some of the reasons for these variances are community leadership operating expenditures 325,000 less than projected, predominantly due to staff vacancies, and additionally councillors' travel and mileage costs, conference costs and catering are lower than projection due to less travel and face-to-face meetings as a result of COVID-19 restrictions. Streetscapes costs are 288,000 under projection. This is a combination of reduced costs and gardening, mowing and street litter bin costs to date. This is primarily due to the timing of when invoices come in from contractors. And additionally, 3 towns have no gardening contract, and their gardening is completed by our work schemes, and therefore is not falling under that mowing or gardening costs as such. And these contract prices have been checked along with the actuals, and it's been monitored, and these have been adjusted through the February forecasting process or the annual plan as necessary. Parks and reserve costs 113 less than projected, with a number of maintenance projects that have yet to be completed contributing to the underspend. The current buoyant market impacting council's ability to engage contractors to undertake some smaller maintenance projects, and additionally investment operating costs is lower than projected, as mentioned above. The borrowing strategy is not yet commenced in the current year, resulting in lower level external borrowings directly impacting external interest costs. Capital expenditure is 4 million lower than projected for the year to date. Some of the reasons for the variance are the toilets, 860,000 lower than projection. 2 tenders have been received for the delivery of the package of these works that was put out to the market, and These projects are due to start in March. However, this may be impacted with the change in COVID-19 status. The refurbishment projects at the Waikawa and Edendale toilets have started and both are well on their way to completion, with the Curio Bay toilet refurbishment have started and the Colic Bay toilets now been installed. Stormwater capital costs are 948,000 less than projection, with the capital program currently being delivered as in related to stimulus work, with projects incurring slightly behind the phase budget costs. The convention date of the Woodlands project has been deferred to line up with the April school holidays to minimise disruption with the school. The water supply capital costs are 1.3 million under projection, largely as a result of the phasing of the projects. Stimulus projects of the AC pipe renewal and the New Zealand Drinking Water Standards compliance have had delays, while the Lakefront Drive water main renewal costs are less than expected for the period. And the Caswell Road water main project only just commencing. The AC pipe renewal and Lakefront Drive projects are expected to be completed in February, and all remaining projects are on track to be completed at the end of June 2020. Council had 5.8 million of funds on call at 31 January 2022, 5 million in term deposits, and had 16.8 million of external borrowings with the LGFA. I'll take any questions you may have.
Thank you for that. Bearing in mind, and I mean, it's always a matter of timing. We're dealing with a January cut-off at this point, which is fair enough in terms of the cycle of the meeting. So I appreciate that, Bree, and things have moved on. You mentioned some things that were due to be done in February, but we won't go there and work out whether that actually happened or not. Members, are there questions that you'd like to ask of Bree and or the assembled team here, please? No? I think what we're hearing from the spree in the silence of the meeting is that actually, well, I mean, there are differences, which means that perhaps we aren't on where we plan to be in terms of being on track. But in reality, you're indicating both the capital program and essentially our work program will catch up, or there are phasing issues with the budget over the course of the period, which is understandable. But essentially, you're signalling that we are in a reasonably solid position in terms of where we anticipated to be. Would that be a fair sort of characterisation of what you said?
Yes. So I think the key thing is that there has been some impacts with COVID-19 throughout the organisation, but it is being monitored and, you know, carefully being, monitored on to try and keep on track as much as we can be at this point in time.
At some stage, they'll all align, Bruce, I'm sure.
Oh, that's right. That's right. It's a truism, but wouldn't it be great when we have to mention COVID as a reason? I wonder whether we'll get to that stage. I might be an old man by then. So I'm probably an old man now. Okay, don't laugh, Abel. Right, I thank you for that, Bree. Look, not taken for granted that actually you're able, a fulsome report, but one that gives us a pretty strong steer as to where we're at. So I do appreciate that. So without there being other questions, members, final roundup, there aren't. I'll go to the recommendation on page 177, which is that we receive the financial report for the period. I'll move that. Do I have a seconder, please?
Happy to second that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Gary. Appreciate that. Is there any discussion on the motion? There being none, I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Those against? It's carried. Thanks a lot. Right. Impact on rates of approved unbudgeted expenditure. A very interesting little report. Leslie is probably in the house somewhere, if not Anne. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chair and councillors. Good, thank you. I'm here this morning to present a report on the impacts of rates approved of unbudgeted expenditure by council to date. The movement in the rates impact is from year 2 of the long-term plan, and these changes have been incorporated into forecasting in the 22-23 annual plan. Other changes made through the annual plan process and forecasting have not been included. And then there's a table below that shows the impact from year 2 at we anticipated 8.31 and the movement of these reports taking it to 8.56. But once again, noting the full review of annual plan changes and any other forecasting changes are not included in there. And it is proposed to present this report to Finance and Insurance Committee each meeting.
Thank you for that, Leslie. As I say, it's a very interesting report and with some good merit. Any members want to make comment or raise any questions on this? Yes, Abel.
Yeah, thank you through you, Mr. Chair, and certainly appreciate the presentation of the report. I just, as a discussion point, really, I note that we seem to pull a lot of money out of reserves, and therefore it doesn't show any impact on the increase on rates. So at some point, I would presume that the reserve starts to be running out, and maybe we should have a bit of a running tally as to how much money we are taking out of reserves as part of the unbudgeted expenditure. It gives us an idea of just the volume of money that is being approved. We've got it here as a bit of a percentage, but we certainly see that on the other hand, you've got the reserves that we are utilising for some of these projects, which is all understandable. But it may be useful that we have that as part of the summary as well. Yes, I think that might just help us as well. So as I say, just put it out there, but really appreciate the report. And quite honestly, I thought the impact on the potential rate increase on the number of unbudgeted expenditure that we have approved to date, I had thought it would have been greater than what's identified. But at least we now know that the increase to date is reasonably minimal. So I appreciate that.
I presume, Abel, you're raising the question actually, so how is the 8.56 versus the 8.31, in other words, the 0.25% roughly funded, which, you know, in the immediate sense might be out of reserves. Although I imagine at that level, we're probably just using our working capital to meet that extra, those extra unbudgeted items at this stage. Would that be fair to say, Leslie?
Yes, that's correct. And then the loans will be repaid with rates going forward.
Yeah.
So it's working off our balance sheet. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah. So which does have an impact on a flow and effect on your rates later on, because those loans do need to be repaid. So it's trying to capture the holistic approach rather than just components of it. So I appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you. Which, before I get past Anne, I mean, essentially what I hear, Abel, is it's one thing for us to recognise, you know, what is an effective rate impact, but actually the question is how are we funding it at the moment. So it's both the financing, which is it's going to increase rate, but the other question is the funding question. How do we actually meet the increased approved, unbudgeted, get the in the right place expenditure? And you're probably going to correct me all, so please go for it.
No, not at all. And in fact, to Councillor Kramer's comment, it's a very valid one, because there's probably two sources of reserves funds that we use. One of them is reserves that are specifically for the purpose for which they're collected. So we're talking about maybe a local community general reserve or a wider district sort of fund. And those sort of reserves, definitely we can incorporate, although depending on how many there are, it might get a reasonably long list. I think the reserve fund, though, that we need to keep the most eye on is the district operations reserve. So that's our general reserve, the pot that's sort of the go-to when we've got nowhere else we can get it from. And it's that one that always tends to get me a little bit concerned and worried. But I will direct you, and it will come up in the next report actually, but on page 210, we did look at that district ops reserve just to make sure that the monies that we weren't, getting into a stage where we're overspending. And actually we were forecasting to have a balance still of 800,000. in that reserve at the end of this year after the transfers that we've taken. I would like to think that it would be around that level. Often what we find is we seem to overcommit on it and then never quite use it completely, but there's always going to be a chance that it may occur. So I do agree with Councillor Kramer that we do need to keep that running balance of the District Ops Reserve incorporated into this report as well going forward.
I think we keep this little useful report and reasonably much to sort of the 2-pager. So it would be a suggestion if there was that the funding side to be shown where it's actually come from, to keep it at the higher level rather than necessarily a full breakdown line by line basis would make sense. It's really just a chance for us to keep essentially a strategic financial management picture of our decisions rather than necessarily a line by line that can come elsewhere, I think would be my recommendation, Abel.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And thanks, Anne, for your comments as well. And I know we're going to discuss it in the following report, but I see this about over $2 million of unbudgeted expenditure there already. So we need to keep things on track. So no, appreciate the comments. Thank you.
Brilliant. Any other questions from members of the committee? Yes, Paul.
I just want to make a comment that sometimes on rare occasions we do also have unbudgeted savings, and while we probably don't, they don't feature as much in our concerns, but sometimes and there'll be some extent to which they can offset some unbudgeted expenditure as well. I guess we just need to keep that in mind.
That's probably what we would call our reserves, given exactly the comments that Anne's just made about the ops reserve. We don't always meet what we plan to draw down. There's a bit of a surplus appearing. Won't use the word P-word profit. We shouldn't be talking that, should we? Okay. Any other questions or points to make? There being none, I'd like to go to that recommendation which we received the report. Firstly, thank you for doing this. It is reflecting that high-level strategic view of our financial management and much appreciated. So I'll move that. Do I have a seconder, please?
Yeah, I'm happy to second that.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Abel. I'll put the motion then. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? That's carried. Right, folks, just a wee bit before I anticipated, I was going to break at 10:30 under good instruction from Fee. We're about 2 minutes early, but rather than have this paper between us and a short break, can I suggest we take a 10-minute break? So if we could be back at 22, that would be useful, and then we will be straight into item 7.9, which is the forecasted financial position for the year 30 June. Folk comfortable with that? Fee, have I got your permission? Yep, you have. You're waving at me. That's fine. Okay, back at 22, people, please. Well, it's just to turn your cameras off and mute, please.
Ricardo, can you do the pausing thing, please? Cool.
There are some things you should feel at least a little guilty about.
Paused, not stopped.
JD Sooner skip bins. You don't have to feel
was wondering why I couldn't hear anything, Fiona. Are they? Oh, why can't I?
We stop for a cup of tea.
Has the report before me finished?
Which one was your one?
I'm the committee work plan. So
no, we're only up to. You obviously haven't read my emails.
No, I did. You wanted the one before me.
We're
Emma,
you're 7:10. We're just about to do 7:09 when we come back from cup of tea.
Oh yeah. Are they? Oh.
We stop for a cup of tea.
Has the report before me finished?
Which one was your one? No, we're going to be doing 7.9 when we come back from cup of tea.
No, I did. You wanted the one before me.
We're
Emma. Yeah.
You're 7:10. We're just about to do 7:09.
Do you like Abel's bit of artwork behind me, Bruce? Oh, he's on the phone.
Oi.
I was talking to Bruce. I was talking to Bruce, not you.
We'll do it privately.
I like it.
What, the pizza? Jesus.
I like it. I think it's lovely.
Oh, well, you could have it.
Did you see Carla on TV the other night? Yeah.
Yeah, she rang us twice and told us that she was going to be on. I'm very proud of herself.
Yeah, she's bloody cool.
Excuse me, you are live on YouTube.
No worries.
Thank you, Fee. Thank you, Folk. I hope you've had a good break. Appreciate
Mayor and councillors, I've flicked an email, a note round on the chat. If you can have a read of that, please.
Yeah, just one or two ins and outs, and if you have to leave the meeting, can you just perhaps by chat let Fee know what the story is, please?
I didn't actually get left. I just had to wander over to the door.
Ring this number.
Yeah, look, no, that's fine, Gary. I think one or two others might have appeared. They might have actually popped out rather than just having turned their system off. So just need to keep a wee bit of track here. Right, folk, if we could please reconvene, as Fee said, we're on live stream, and I'd like to move to item 7.9, please, which is the forecast financial position. And we're recording now. And Cherie, possibly you, I think. Cherie's somewhere there.
Good morning. Yes, I am.
Oh, you are there, Cherie. How are you? Gotcha.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chair and committee members. So today I'm presenting the forecasted financial position for the year ending 30th of June 22. The purpose of this report is to outline the expected year-end financial result compared to year one of the published long-term plan, and to seek the committee's recommendation to council to approve the resulting forecasted position and associated unbudgeted expenditure. You'll note from the report that there effectively, this report outlines a number of unbudgeted expenditure requests, as well as the deletion, deferral, and bringing forward of a number of projects. I'll take this report as read, and I appreciate it. It's quite a comprehensive report. But what I'm going to do is, I guess, highlight some of the key points that I wanted to bring to your attention. So just to give you an overview of the process to date, what's actually happened is the activity managers have reviewed their actual results and their forecasted position end of January, early February, and identified where they believe forecast adjustments need to take place. And as you would have heard in our earlier discussions around the monthly financial report, some of these results have arisen as of timing differences or phasing, or actually just known adjustments in relation to actual contract agreements or project costs. I think the key thing to note is that the majority of the significant forecast changes relate to capital projects. Our capital expenditure is proposed to be decreasing through this forecasting process by $6 million, and that's predominantly as a result of projects being deferred to later years, deleted from the work program. And I guess the point to note there is that this includes budget savings on anticipated completed projects. We also note that we are proposing to carry forward a number of projects as well. I'll just give you a bit of an overview of the attachments, because I think they give a good summary of what's included in this report. So attachment A includes a forecasted financial statement of comprehensive revenue and expenditure, so the profit and loss statement. Attachment B shows the statement of financial position for the year ending 30th of June, and also just want to note there the revised version of that was circulated by Fiona on Friday afternoon, with a couple of changes in relation to reserves and loans. Attachment C provides details of changes to expenditure for both local activities and district activities, up to the value of $50,000. Attachment D provides details of significant changes to expenditure, so once again, unbudgeted expenditure above $50,000. Attachment E provides the details of specific projects being deferred to future years. Attachment F, specific projects being deleted. And attachment G, projects being brought forward from future years. Attachment H provides basically a net change to revenue, operating expenditure and capital expenditure on a business unit basis, with some brief commentary provided by the budget managers. An additional point to note is that the Chief Executive has delegated authority to approve unbudgeted expenditure under $10,000. Attachment I includes a list of the minor expenditure totaling $34,000, which Cameron is happy to approve. That's arisen through this process. Excuse me. Further to Councillor Duffy's earlier report comment around that there is potentially savings or negative adjustments, through the forecasting process, we have identified $1.9 million worth of these, and that is noted in more detail in paragraph 19 on page 204. One of the points to note is that we have endeavoured to ensure our community boards are aware of both changes to local budgets and movements in local projects. And I guess now I would just, like to bring you to the key, issues or forecasting issues that we wanted to bring to your attention. The first one being the impact of our forecasting on our works program, paragraph 41. Here you will note that there is two tables which outline our original proposed capital works program for both roading and other activities. It's key to note that incorporated into this, we have to be mindful of both the carry forwards and the unbudgeted expenditure reports that have been approved to date. So for non-roading activities, you'll see that carry forwards and unbudgeted expenditure have increased our capital works program from $28.9 million to $34.8 million. These forecasting adjustments are proposing to remove $5.9 million, which effectively brings us back to $28.8 million capital works program, which is very similar to the original plan. Roading, on the other hand, only has a minor works changes around predominantly footpaths works. I think just to bring to your attention, one of the biggest issues with this is the ongoing impact of, adding those carry forward projects and adding unbudgeted expenditure projects, which makes the delivery of the work program quite difficult. And it also limits our ability as a council to successfully achieve our projects. This is a historic issue as well as an ongoing issue, and one that we need to continually be aware of. Management have advised that they believe the forecasted 21-22 work program is on track to be delivered, but note that there is still a risk of further market resource shortages, as we've heard throughout the various reports today, and supply delays, which could result and are impacted by COVID-19. The second point that we wanted to note there was those significant unbudgeted expenditure items. So attachment D outlines 6 items totaling $0.7 million, which we would deem to be significant because they're above $50,000. All except for one of these items relate to capital and maintenance expenditure for water and sewage. We're proposing a forecasted increase in unplanned maintenance for water of 200,000 and sewage of 50,000. Also, the Riverton water supply and the Ojai wastewater UV projects are forecasted to have increase in budgets of $120,000 and $150,000. As you'll appreciate, these budgets were originally set back in the development of the long-term plan in 2020. We also note that there has been a number of surge pump, or forecasted to be a number of surge pump replacements at a cost of $61,000. These are deemed to be minor capital works, but currently there is no budget allowed for this. The remaining change results to the resource consent process activity, and there has been a number of discussions about this activity over the, I guess, the last few months. The important thing to note is that they are requesting an increase in costs associated predominantly with consultants and legal. We have had both a volume and a complexity increase in the applications that are coming through, and also noting that there is a complex consent application, and currently we're council as the landowner, so we need to have an external consultant on hand to manage this process to maintain independence. Overall, there's a shortfall of $101,000, which is proposed to be funded from the District Operation Reserve in relation to this. This activity is seeking to recoup some of this cost from increased fee revenue. Impact on forecasting of rates, paragraph 57 to 60 of this report gives an overview of the future impact on rates of the forecasting changes. So as you'll appreciate, our rates for the 21-22 year have already been set in July 2021, and therefore we can't change those. But going forward, the key thing really that will drive changes in rates is movements in loan funding associated with those deferral or removal of capital works. We're anticipating that this is approximately about 327,000, of which the rate impact is 50% of that for the 22-23 year. Important thing to note here is that given the timing of our consideration and our I guess communication to the public on the 22-23 annual plan, that these forecast changes have been incorporated into the documents and the discussion that you will see later, I think tomorrow actually, as part of the council agenda. Other than that, I guess I've tried to give a bit of an overview, but I am happy to take questions, and the GMs are all on hand ready to answer if you want to get really technical about any of your questions. But I appreciate it was quite a hard report to write, amalgamating all the information together and probably comprehend, but yes, happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Sheree. This is a really important point. As I've grown up in the area of financial management, the discipline of forecasting is actually really important. So just as we've looked at our non-financial performance, looking at our financial performance as well, it's really important because any smart organisation will try and anticipate where it's going to be by year end. Sheree, a totally left field question. Have you got any sense at the cost for the organisation to do this forecast?
Oh,
How many hours would it have taken across the organisation? Just a guesstimate. I'll let you think about that. You might come back to me. Seriously, I really just wanted to give members a sense of firstly the importance of this, but secondly, it does take some giving effort. It is undoubted in terms of that. And yet, if we even reflect Abel back on, sorry, I say it's your item, Mike, because I think it was you with the key and sister monitoring we were at with our rate relative to unbudgeted decisions. This really does create a significant. This is an important part of our financial management process. So I'm just wanting to be probably in the long run appreciative, Sheree, of your team doing this, but it would be interesting to know what it takes to reforecast, because actually it is really important. Members, are there questions now that you would like to make? I'm certainly happy to spend some time if you have questions of clarification, even on what Sheree has said. There is a lot of information to take on board here, and we will come back to the resolutions and we'll take them piecemeal just to make certain we understand what we're doing. But in terms of the report, generally the comments that Sheree's made, do we have comments or in particular questions of clarification at this stage? No, it all makes sense.
Well, it doesn't make sense. It just shows the current where we're at the moment, and as I think we're further discussing some parts of this tomorrow.
Good. Well, if there was something this committee was keen to do, I'd be very happy for it to make a noise for you council tomorrow. So there's a chance to look at this now. Abel?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to excuse me, more of a compliment to the staff for producing this very detailed report. I don't have questions on the accuracy or data. It just really highlights the areas that we do need to focus on, and it shows the volumes of expenditure that we're ticking off during the course of the year, or that we're transferring through to the following year. It just really highlights the numbers that are really involved, and for us to really get a handle on it. Yeah, it just highlighted how things are moving reasonably quickly during a very short period of time during a financial year, and the implications that it actually has. So yeah, it's we can get this on a regular basis, and yeah, at least we've got the data in front of us. We might not be happy about it, but there are certain aspects that are beyond council's control, external influences, and we have to acknowledge that. We have to own that, we have to understand it. Yeah, the best plans we can put together with our LTP, but then once you go out into the market, you certainly realise that on some occasions those figures fall short, and I think we have to acknowledge that. We can do the best assumptions as we possibly can, and I'll certainly note that from management, that at the time you do make those assumptions when you're putting that plan together. And as I say, external influences that have been occurring over the last 12 to 18 months have certainly had an impact on costs and our ability to be able to fulfill our level of service, which we, some of these are now putting that into question. And it's because of those external influences. Excuse me. So those are the sort of comments I would make, but at least we've got a handle on whereabouts we're at. So appreciate it.
Thank you for that, Abel. It's a really important points. One of the things that I took out of Sheree, and I mean, you haven't focused on it naturally because there's a whole lot of data to try and get through, but to come back up to the big picture, I did look at paragraphs 38 and 39 of your report, because I presume 38 is worked out on the reforecast position that will be achieved here, and it's to reflect it's a metric of reasonable standing within the sector, which is what is our capital spend relative to depreciation. It goes back to the questions we had with with Hartley around is 0.3% difference between what we achieve versus what we plan to achieve in our resales important. And this is at a higher level, this is at a global level, but it is reflecting that with the reforecast budget, we still plan to achieve 146% capital spend in excess of our depreciation. And that's important because, as I understand it, from the LTP discussions that we had with the community now a couple of years ago, they wanted us to get on with things. So the important point here is that the reforecast, even with the issues of having to defer and move things around as the way that we'll come back to look at the schedules, we're still holding to basically that premise and promise to the community that we will be working really hard to work on, particularly the renewal of our asset systems and development of those asset systems. So that metric is actually a really good one, even if the detail tends to somewhat swamp you. So that's not too bad. Sheree, you've got your hand up. I suspect you've got some good points to make.
Sorry. Yeah, one of the other points that I just wanted to note was a reoccurring theme that we've had through our monthly council report is just our internal income, internal interest income and expense, and where we sit in relation to our borrowing and investment strategy. And I do apologise, it was an oversight. I was probably too focused on pulling everyone else's results together. To actually revisit that, but our intention is to look at that, and we'll report that in one of the upcoming monthly financial reports on where we are sitting in relation to that. I guess the key point to note is although we aren't effectively receiving that external interest at this point in time, we will effectively receive the interest on the reserves that we continue to hold internally.
Thank you for that. Yes, an accountant's problem, isn't it? You're looking after everyone else's interests and you forget your own. So I get that point. Yes, John.
Yes, okay, Bruce, thank you. You raised the point there that our capital spend is 146% of our depreciation, and perhaps Anne might like to come in here. Is the desired level to be 100? In other words, that our capital spend equals our depreciation. Do you have any comments on that? And are we fully funding depreciation now? Well, I know we were moving towards that target. Have we achieved it, or are we a year or two off?
So no, we're still a few years off. Sheree, what are we, 70% now of funding?
Yeah, I think it's 26. 27, I think, is the first year of 100%.
Yeah, funding those key infrastructure projects anyway. In regards to the level, I don't think we should ever be dollar for dollar. I don't think it should ever be 100 to 100, because we have to remember that depreciation is an evaluation of the useful life of assets. So we tend to get a bit generic with that and go, well, we think pipes generally will last us like 70 years. But in reality, some might last only 50 years and some might last us 100 years. So I think by default, we want to use the 100% as a minimum standard, not potentially something that we want to go towards, but just as that minimum. And also, I think that thing we also need to remember, of course, is with our roading assets, they are above ground. So we have a lot more ability to monitor them, which is the majority of our, God, Sheree, what is it, $1.5 billion worth of assets now? I think it's about 1.2. Yep. Yeah, it's about 1.2. So we can see a lot of those assets too.
John, it is more a case. I was reflecting on what the targets were we set ourselves, which I was taking as a given would be at least 100%, if not higher. As Anne says, it's a rough guide, but it's an important guide because you've got to, your financial numbers should be trying to interpret in a dollar version the truth. So that's why I love them. That's why I'm looking at it. So yeah. Any other questions, folk? Can I just raise a question again? I think we covered this last time, Sheree, page 115. You were quite rightly raising that essentially our movement and our treasury management approach is changing, but obviously it's going to gather pace. I see there on page 215 that against the LTP projection will be at $56 million. Is there a current provision? Yes, there is another 6. So we'll be at $62 million of external debt by 30 June. Yes, versus the plan 77.
Yes, that interpretation is correct. I guess depending on how far we move with that investment and borrowing strategy will be whether that is entirely external or it's a combination of internal debt and external.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Good. Right, is there anything here that's worthwhile? I just think, given the nature of well, I wonder if we should go to the resolutions so that we can work through them, because even though I understand this comes back up for council tomorrow, we are being asked in effect in front of council to recommend to them the various things. So if I was to go to page 199, which is the start of our recommendations, A makes sense, we receive. B, C is that we are being consistent with the Act. D, that we recommend the changes as detailed in Appendix H. So I wonder, members, if you could just firstly and very quickly scoot to Appendix H, just so that you can be aware of that. He's trying to find it himself, which is a eye-wateringly small set of
page 226.
Thank you very much, Cherie. Appreciate that. So these are forecast adjustments to revenue, operating expenditure, and capital expenditure summarised by business unit. So we've been asked to approve the changes as detailed. Is there anything in your preparation that attracts your eye that you need to raise questions on at this point? It's good that it's by business area, because it possibly reflects some of your different interests. There are none. If we move then to E, we note the forecasted changes to the year-end financial performance and position as detailed in A and B, and I've just referred to at least one significant part of that, which is our change in treasury management position. That's for us to note. F becomes important, that we approve the following unbudgeted expenditure and associated funding source. So it's a variation on the thing we had under the small macro paper on what was the impact of unapproved. Yes, go for it, Fiona. We've got a change here, correct? You need to have your mute off, Fiona. Fiona, mute. You're muted.
Damn.
That's about $20 you owe me, but that's okay.
It needs that little tweak to it. F's changing and H is changing, so I'll screen share the things and scroll through it while you're explaining it, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was just going to add some context to the rationale for those changes.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so effectively, as we were, after the agenda had gone out, double checking things and putting them through into the annual plan process, we just identified that there was some toilet projects that had incorrectly been noted to be funded via reserves when they actually should be loans. So that effectively resulted in a reclassification on the balance sheet in attachment B. So there was a change to the movement in the other reserves and the movement in the borrowings. So there is a revised attachment B that was circulated. And then in relation to the F and, sorry, I'm just following through, F and J, you will note that there are funding source changes, so that's effectively those toilet projects that we've changed from reserves to loans. And also just a note there in relation to the Waikaia Forest, an increase of 148,000 to the unbudgeted expenditure for harvesting costs, etc. What typically happened there was that was all associated with the October unbudgeted expenditure report that went up around forestry, but just the way that we'd captured it in our data, we didn't get the extra 148,000 for approval in there. So I do apologise for that.
Right, thanks, Sheree. So F is showing unbudgeted expenditure and associated funding source. Any questions on that? I mean, there's a lot there, but they're all, yes, Sable?
Yeah, what's the total, and excuse me, I can't quite find it at the moment, what's the total unbudgeted expenditure that we're approving today or recommending to council today? What's the total?
It's a good point. I was thinking that before, Abel. Do you know what the total of the dollar column is, Sheree?
For attachment C, so for this resolution F, it is 543,640. Oh, plus the 148. Apologies.
So that's 700,000.
Yep. And then there's the other 700,000 over 50,000, which are included in the next attachment.
So you got 1.4.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then you've got projects that are being deferred as in resolution H. If you're thinking about total funding needs, aren't you, Abel?
Exactly.
So what does H come to?
It should be included on there.
It's quite a bit, doesn't it? While Sheree's doing that, are there any comments from members about what is being deferred? I presume some of those bigger items are probably reasonably well understood and signalled previously. And then we have I, which is actually deletions. So they go right out. So any of the associated funding is not needed anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. And then J, as Sheree has indicated, is a change in the way in which the funding, the funding source of those is being sourced. And for the benefit of everybody, and thank you for doing this, Fee, you can see highlighted in front of you on the shared screen that there are a couple or so corrections to the actual resolution, which should replace what's effectively on the pages in your agenda.
Yep, I understand that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, sorry, the total adjustments is 4.88 million.
Yeah.
And that's a decrease because I guess you've got increased income and then you've got increased expenditure, but you've also got the decreased capital.
Yes, which is being deferred into future years. Yes, which if I pick it up correctly, your paragraph, not you, was too many pages here. Your paragraph 41 on page 208 is really picking up in the summary version, right? Is that make sense?
Yes, that is correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So I agree. Abel, I think it would be good, potentially helpful to have had the total at the bottom of these tables, but I've taken that paragraph 41 as a virtual summary of what we're proposing to resolve here.
Yeah, but as you've indicated, a tally at the end of each table there will be and they're still having to go back to the text to see what the implications are. Would be good to see that at the end of each table, and then a summary in a Excel table as identified, because we're looking at a 4.88 million. You're saying savings, Sheree, or deferred to all the following financial year?
Yeah. Yep. And I guess the important thing to remember is that the funding stream for a lot of those expenditure changes is different as well. Not some of them are loans, some of them are reserves.
Yeah, it's trying to get a a total picture of that. And by transferring those projects across, it's certainly going to have an implication in the ability to deliver the services that we've already planned for the following year. So it sort of compounds that aspect as well.
Agreed. And hence why we've endeavoured to try and incorporate them into the annual plan 22-23 at this point, but noting this is still a forecast position for June 2022, and although we have the best intentions to deliver this, there could give rise to future carry forwards into 22-23 as well for uncompleted works. I think the other thing to note too, and I did mention it in the report, is that a number of these projects are actually multi-year projects as well. And so when we set the budget for them, we decipher, I guess, or we anticipate when we're going to do that planning and design and construction, and sometimes that could fall over 2 or 3 years or even longer. And so often that feeds into our carry forwards as well as to where we've got to, or the difference between what we've achieved and what we plan to achieve for those multi-year projects.
Yep, I fully understand that. But the issue still is before us is that we're looking at recommending approval of $1.4 million worth of unbudgeted expenditure. Yes, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. And that's still concerning, but I can see reasoning for it. But it's certainly quite significant that we're looking at that sort of additional expenditure, which is of concern.
It comes back to your point about the previous paper.
Exactly.
The 2 pages of the overall financial management that we're, and indeed the lead that Anne has given us, that we're dipping into reserves and probably the operational reserve to be able to achieve this.
Exactly.
But where it's got to be paid for, I think is your point, Abel.
Yep, exactly. Thank you. All right.
And I think the other thing then, just to confirm, Shareen, I just wanted to clarify, is H, which is a deferral. You're saying in terms of the annual plan, you have picked this up in the annual plan.
Yes. Yep. The draft annual plan for 22-23 does incorporate these changes.
Brilliant. So that's good. That's the connection that's really important here as well. Abel, if I could, given you've raised these questions, is that in deferring them, which seems easy, we haven't forgotten them. And so the annual plan process can consider those as well.
Yeah.
That's very helpful set of line of questioning, and I appreciate your comments, Abel. Are there any other comments from members you'd like to make?
See, John's got his hand up.
Sorry, Abel?
John's got his hand up.
John, you've got a point? Sorry, I've seen the shared screen. I can't see it.
Thanks, Bruce. And just following up from what Abel was saying, I mean, it's important that we differentiate between operational expenditure and capital expenditure. So am I correct in saying our operational expenditure is proposed to increase by 1.4, but we're getting a 4.8 million decrease in capital expenditure?
Deferral of $4.8 million, John.
Deferral, or but not occurring this financial year.
Yes.
That's my understanding.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes just I'm not saying any of us are simple or anything, but a summary page right at the finish, just to sort of highlight those end of report points, to pull it all together in a way that's is clear and easily understood.
I would suggest support that, John, but I would suggest that the summary is at the start of the report, so we have a clear understanding as we work our way through it, because then you understand the information that follows that. Just as a comment.
Yeah, I think actually that would be therefore combining the 2-pager with this report, because actually I think the thing that you're worried, if I can anticipate your concern, Abel, your reality of it is under F, which is the $1.4 million, if I've got it correct. The real issue is how much of that is an impact and or impost on rates.
Correct. Correct.
Which again, back to the original paper, and that's what we're arguably missing here. Without, I mean, I'm not saying the report's deficient, but I'm just reflecting in terms of the total picture, which would help you. What percentage of this, or what is the impact on those rates that you're talking about here?
Exactly. Thank you.
Anne or Cherie, is there any sort of response or comment you'd like to make? If we're off beam, tell us, please.
I think it's probably just important to point you to paragraph 57 to 60, where we did address the impact on the future rates as a result of those changes. So probably not explicitly to the extent of line by line basis, but recognising that I guess the significant future impacts for rates are where we're moving those loans and the repayments on the loans, and also where we have operational expenditure that has increased, or there's new contracts and stuff in place as well. And we have done our best to incorporate all of that in working with the activity managers into the 22-23 annual plan.
Thank you. That's thank you for correcting us. That's helpful to just reflect on reading 57 to 60 again, or just cast my eye down. It effectively reflects how you'll manage this year, but it will have that flow through effect, and which you already factored into your annual plan on future years' rates. Is that helpful, Abel?
Yeah, when I look at the 1.4 mil additional cost, that's what's that? Is that about 2.5% on rates? Isn't it every 500,000 about 1%? So about 2.5.
That's correct. I guess the key point to note there is that majority of those are actually proposed to be funded via reserves.
Yes, I realise that, and that's why it needs that explanation. That's where we need to get that full picture. No, appreciate it.
And the other thing there from your question, John, is particularly key is paragraph 58, which is also reflecting the debt movement, which again relates primarily to your capital and the changes that are occurring there with a reduction in effectively in the interest cost.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, folks.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Anne.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Just one question for Cherie, though. You have noticed that it's coming through reserve, Cherie, but some of those lines, I guess, will have an ongoing impact on rates, especially if they're electricity and maintenance electrical. So it might have been paid by reserves this year, but do we know if those things are going to have ongoing impacts? Because if they're a result of electricity prices increasing or contracts, then by default, they have to come from rates in future years.
Yes, I believe the significant work was done in the community facilities area with the new contracts as a result of the Section 17A reviews. And in the forecasting, Mark Day and his team have done quite a lot of work to look at those actual contracts that are in place and identify if there's been increases or decreases in cost and reflect those in the future budgets. The other area also probably significant to note was around the unplanned maintenance for water and sewage. And I know that that has been revisited for the 22-23 annual plan to incorporate that in the future as well.
But you certainly raise a very valid point, Anne. You certainly raise a very valid point that we identify those factors that do have an ongoing financial impact and then have an ongoing impact on rates. So we do need to capture those. So yeah.
But I also go back to Cherie's comment as well, though. It has been incorporated into that rate increase of the 9.22. So when you actually think about this, if we're getting operational costs at this level, then we've also looked to make savings in other areas because our overall rate increase is generally due to the increase in the interest rates. So there's been equal amounts of decreases compared to some of these going up and down. And I think it's just reflective of the nature of our business, isn't it? At times some things go up and other things go down.
But is it also, sorry to interrupt, is it also a reflection that some of the work hasn't been done for whatever reason? So therefore the money hasn't been spent and we're transferring it through. So are we comparing apples with apples?
When you're talking about operational costs, there is always a layer in there that's maintenance related that may not be needed, but I can't comment on whether it's not been done or not. But definitely budgets for things like maintenance are definitely built for situations to occur, but that you don't necessarily know about, as well as for planned maintenance, which will occur. So there is an element in there, but on the whole,
All right, thank you. Yep.
I think the other point to, sorry, if I can just allude to, is that we don't effectively need a resolution for those savings or those negative forecast adjustments as well, which are identified in paragraph 19. So it's probably just they are incorporated in all of the, or particularly the attachment H, but actually there is no specific resolution around those as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, that's John. Sorry, John, you still got your hand up, buddy?
No, it's coming down. Thank you.
Right, Abel, look, you've raised some good questions. Can I look to the resolutions? Are you comfortable now? I appreciate your good line of questioning. It's been the discussion's been valuable. I'm in a comfortable position, I think, now. Are you in that position as well?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chair, very comfortable now with the explanation, so it's been really appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, look, I'll move.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I had to leave. There was a situation happening across the road from me with the police. I had to step out, and I hope that that this has been pretty well discussed, because it goes a long way towards further discussions.
Yes, tomorrow. Appreciate that. Yes, you'll come with a strong recommendation from us, Gary. Look, I hope all goes well next door. I'll leave you in peace. Thank you. Right, members, I'll move.
I'm happy to second the recommendations.
I'm moving, Abel seconding, and just to be clear, it's the one that was on the screen. There were some minor changes, which I don't think we need to go back through at this point to the total tables. I'm going to acknowledge, though, that it is the amended tables that we are adopting here. Is there any discussion on the motion or motions? There's a few here. I'm going to treat them all as one. I'll put the motion, please. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Cherie, again, many, many thanks. Another paper which reflects sterling effort by the team for us, and I do appreciate that. And noting that we're recommending to council, you've got council tomorrow.
Thank you, Cherie.
I wish you well with council.
Thank you. I don't know if my story will be quite the same, but
hopefully, in a sense, today's discussion, and you can see the emphasis that we're placing on the overall movement, as well as the detail of the movement, is the picture that we're keen to see to be active governors of our financial positions. So I appreciate your efforts. Both the text and sometimes numbers are also good to have as well. So it's great. Thank you very much for your work.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cherie. Thank you.
Can we move to the work plan? I think that's next, 7.10. That's on page 235 of your agendas. And Emma, welcome back. And welcome back, Gary.
Good morning, Chair and councillors again. This time I'd like to present the Finance and Assurance Committee work plan for next year. As you'll understand from this year, adopting the work plan doesn't preclude reports being added or moved as we go along. So this is just the initial draft plan. I would like to point out it's an election year, so you'll see the meeting dates to be confirmed after October. And you'll see the plan includes the annual plan and both this year and next year's annual report. The 21-22 annual report timetable is similar to this year, which aligns with Derek's earlier comments during this meeting. You'll see there are 5 regular quarterly reports that are combined: risk, health and safety update, health and safety events report, financial monthly report, and the update on the audit actions. And below that are the one-off reports. I'd just like to highlight a couple of issues here. Deloitte were appointed as Council's internal auditor in 2018 for 3 years, and a decision to reappoint or go out to tender will be brought to the June meeting. Once the internal auditor is appointed, the new 3-year work program will be developed, and hopefully that will be presented in October as per the plan. You'll also note currently there are no policy reviews in this work plan. So the majority of these happen in the LTP year, which is scheduled to fall in 23-24. However, depending on resourcing and workload, staff may look to undertake some of these next year and bring them forward, just to spread the load for both staff and F&A. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Emma. Good to be looking forward, and I appreciate you bringing this report to us now. Are there any comments folk would like to make? I mean, I think this is something that we can take on advice, and as you said, Emma, there's 1 or 2 other bits and pieces that will fall into place as the cycle of the committee, even between now and the elections, falls due. I don't want to make provocative statements, but I do think we have to anticipate the annual report will be signed off either in November or more likely December. We don't have the plan at this stage, but I would be surprised if we get a what have we got there, a 27 September position. We need to hold that item on the 27th of September because I think it's incumbent on us as the outgoing committee and council to leave it in a safe position for the incoming council to deal with an audit on a set of accounts they're technically not accountable for because the letter of representation, the actual compliance statement and the annual report can only be signed at the date on which it's adopted, which I suspect, as I said, will probably be the December 2022 meeting. I want to be careful there. We don't have a view from Derek yet when it's going to be, but I would feel I've got good advice to advise us that that's the most likely date that we would have a report signed on. And you may have a differing view, but I don't think it'll be the 27th, but we will need to have a placeholder on the 27th to enable us just to wrap up what we know of the annual report at that stage prior to passing some helpful messages on to the new council.
Indeed.
Okay, with that, can we just go to the resolution, please, which is that we receive the report and we agree the work plan. I think it's fair to say that in moving that, we note that actually we'll have the chance, as we always have, to visit and revise, but I still think it's important to have the picture on what the year is going forward. So again, thank you for this, Emma. So look, I'll move those 2 motions. Do we have a seconder, please? Thank you, Gary. Is there any discussion on the motion? We're fine. I'll put it then, please. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against?
Aye.
That's carried. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. 7.1, the internal audit program. We've got a wee proposed change. So, Anne, I'm in your hands, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, councillors, your worship. So what I'd like the committee to do today is just consider a change to our internal audit program. You'll be aware, of course, that back in 2018, we set up 6 pieces of work to be completed. And we noted at that stage that there may be possible changes to that as we went along. Those 2 remaining pieces of work are asset management and information integrity. Both of them are key pieces of work. But at this stage, we're just proposing a program be based around the prevention of bribery and corruption and fraud and incorporating some training. And that's just further to that Audit New Zealand management report. And I guess the other key reasons for us just proposing this is that at this point in time, we've just got really high workloads going on in regards to everything we need to do and with COVID around. And we just have also a huge amount of work still as a result of our last 2 internal audits that we're just trying to get on top of, as well as currently undertaking our FMS replacement process. So that's replacing our financial system. And as part of that, we're looking at the reporting needs that's in there. So that's why we're sort of planning that. I think it's also important to note that Audit New Zealand management letter about fraud and bribery, it's been carrying on for a few years. So it would actually just be quite nice to equally just tick that off the delivery box. And I think that just draws us back to perhaps the scope that the audit might take, and that I wanted to put around what Audit New Zealand commented to us. They suggested that council form a risk assessment to identify where council is most at risk, and provide some additional training and support to key staff susceptible in those areas. So by no means has any fraud, bribery or corruption been identified at this stage. It is precautionary in its nature, but we can all see how the world is changing, and it's something that we just need to ensure that we've got our fingers on the pulse on. So based on that, Deloitte have provided a proposal for your consideration. But I think there's 4 questions that we just need to go through. And what I'd like to do is just ask each one of those and get your sort of comments as we go. And that will help round out the resolutions that are included in this report. So I think the first question is the committee happy to undertake a change to that audit plan program?
I'm comfortable with it.
Yeah, totally agree.
We'll just reflect, and from my perspective, when do we pick up the asset management information integrity? I hear your point about the challenges from staff perspective. They're not double negative. They are related to our ongoing sense of some of our more strategic risks. When would you anticipate we'd be able to pick those up again?
So we definitely have to rebuild. When the internal auditor is reappointed, and we're producing a report, as you've heard earlier, to the June, they will actually undertake a new program of works. Based on what I'm thinking and the LTP coming up, and I see that Mr. Russell's just come on board now, so he might want to have a comment. We're just thinking that maybe it's probably the first piece of work in the new financial year that we undertake. So later, potentially this year.
We're talking as the new financial year post 1 July this year.
Correct.
Yes,
but
I'd be keen. I think. Look, and I'm being disingenuous, and you've asked me about this before, and I think I've said I would be keen not to lose particularly either of these, that they should be done early. They need to be done ideally this year if they're going to have a beneficial impact on our LTP preparation process for 24, albeit who knows what 24 holds for us. It'll be a distinct year. Okay, thank you for that. Any other comments from?
Through you, Mr. Chair, just a comment to add to the asset management audit that's just been discussed. It's worthwhile noting that it's probably almost a year ago now, we have undertaken an asset management maturity assessment under the International Infrastructure Management Manual. With Becca, so it would be worthwhile perhaps in the first instance running the committee through the process and output associated with that to determine whether or not it's worthwhile then getting another external entity to undertake an auditing process, or whether you'd like to revisit that timeline further.
Appreciate that, Matt. Look, and it's really just, I think, a sense of where we place holding these for a decision-making process, Matt. So totally get your point. And it should be informed by the work we've got to date that is still current and relevant, which is fine. Any other views from folk? I'm very comfortable that we do the bribery and corruption study because it's one of those things that, in a sense, is difficult to prioritise when you don't sense there is any particular evidence of it. Well, and we're asserting there is no evidence of it within inside the organisation, but that's the exact time to be doing this study, because I do reflect from my experience where it does occur, it absolutely goes through an organisation and creates a lot of problems. So prevention is a better part of the cure here, I think. So I'd be very keen that we do this for our own benefit rather than even just what the auditor says. Not that they're wrong. Okay, is there any other discussion on this? Oh, sorry, you wanted to raise some questions about the scope, Anne, is that right?
Yeah, so if I just go on to The next point is just that you agree that we'd probably do that focus more on the bribery and corruption with an emphasis on where there's more susceptible in that training.
Yes.
Okay, everybody happy? Because you'll have seen from the Deloitte, they're proposing a variety of streams of work, but that was the two I sort of wanted to concentrate on. The next part was around the fact that just agreeing to complete it still within that $15,000 budget that you have for each audit piece. You're still comfortable, because technically if you look at the proposal, it could be less and it could be more. It just depends how we undertake the work.
I think it's an important piece of work, and we need to put those funds against it to make sure it gets done. So very comfortable with the 15K.
Cool.
And I would back that up. And I would like to see a limit of 15K, but it's a very important piece of work.
Yep. Cool.
Thanks, John.
And I think then the last part that I've got is that if the committee, because usually we'd bring the terms of reference to the committee for agreement, but if you are comfortable with the discussion that we've had for the chairman and myself, just agree those terms of reference with Deloitte.
Happy with that.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. This is so that we can get this done before year end. That's before financial year end. That's correct, isn't it, Anne? I think that's important.
Yes, I want to bring
so to give us that flexibility is helpful, and it sounds like you're comfortable, so I appreciate that. Okay, thank you, Anne. So if we move to the resolutions, again, received the report. Thank you, Anne, for being diligent over the program. We are meeting, I think, in this case, the ACT, or in all cases, the ACT. We agree to the plan internal audit program to include bribery, corruption and fraud, with an emphasis around bribery and corruption. In effect, is what we've discussed, and you delegate to Anne and I the chance to fix this up with Deloitte for a maximum of $15,000, the way we deem best to spend that money. So appreciate the endorsement of that. So look, I'll move that from the chair. Do I have a seconder, please? Yep. Thank you, John. Appreciate that. Any discussion on the motion? There being none, I'll put all those in favour. Please say aye.
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 Those against, it's carried. Thank you very much. Right, if we could move on to item 7.12. Well, it seems like when you change the treasury management process, it just keeps on coming back at you, giving gifts of things to be done. So this is another thing to be done. To get, you'll recall we discussed the idea of this, I think with Brett, didn't we, in February? My memory is correct. And so this is actually functional in terms of getting through it. So Anne, again, in your hands as to the process we have to go through to appoint a fund manager.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, again. So this has definitely been a journey that the council have been slowly working through. It started with that investment and liability policy, and I've been trying to slowly just tick off various components along the way. This particular aspect is basically to agree the shortlisted managed funds that we potentially would send a request for proposal to. And also to consider and recommend to council then the next steps of the actual appointment. Now, this is not agreeing to the amount of money that we would place with the fund manager, nor is it saying when we would do it, okay? Both of those steps have to be agreed by council. All of this is just looking for that request for proposal to be sent out to the 6 shortlisted indicated, and then to agree to the next steps in the recommendation of an investment fund manager to council or managers. Okay, now just as a background, I know you've probably heard it before, but of course council's investment policy notes how our investments will be managed. It's established in there that we will accept only a low risk for our working capital and our restricted funds, but it's also indicated a moderate risk for our general reserves. And a moderate risk has been indicated as a balanced fund, which is hence the reason why we're looking at the shortlist today. It still hasn't, or it still allows us the ability to borrow internally if we so wish. So that option is still there. And as you've heard right now, we're still internally borrowing until we go through this process. To help us with this, because of course there's specialists in this field, it's a very specialist field, we've asked PwC to assist in appointing, or to assist us in appointing a manager. But as I said before, council still have to decide on when and what is invested. The process that they've gone through to date, and I won't go through it because it's in the report, but they've got to a point where they've shortlisted 6 funds, as indicated. These are Milford, ANZ, ASB, Westpac, and Quay Street. Okay, so each of those are balanced funds that they're looking for. And so what they're now looking for us to do is give approval or recommend to council approval that a request for proposal be sent to those 6. That proposal is around about 100 questions that they ask them to answer. And then they get back those questions, and then they put a series of evaluation criteria and questions over the top of that. And then they will come back to us with a recommendation of what I'm suggesting the top 4 managers would be. And then my suggestion from there is that we ask for those 4 to present to our next finance and assurance meeting. And we consider that we consider their responses alongside what PwC are recommending for us then to recommend to council a preferred fund manager or managers, as the case may be. I think that the key in here probably is, if I refer you to page 264, PwC have given us some criteria under which they're going to do the evaluations. And they've put some weightings alongside those evaluations. And I guess it's just the comfort level of this committee that those weightings are what you would want them to be at this stage. That's their recommendations, but the committee can change that if they so wish.
Thank you, Anne. So I think there's a number of ways in which you might provide Anne with comment. One is the overall process and timeline leading to the next Finance and Assurance Committee being significant in the appointment of a manager or managers. And I reflect there that if I recall correctly, when we were discussing this with Brett last time, the concept was that we might actually appoint 2 managers, probably splitting our funds, which provides a bit of internal check and test as far as that's concerned, and spreads our risk. And the second part, sorry, that's noise, it's a plane going over here. I wonder, then there's also comments around the actual assessment framework, which of course reflects that PwC are recommending to us, currently wash my mouth out, I've got a wrong, Matt, a weighted attribute approach, where obviously the fee is only 10% of the total consideration. So there are a couple of things here for us to consider. One is, are those weightings right? And indeed, the little graph indicates how they might consider the influence of those weights in the decision of what they bring back to us. So process and attribute weighting. Any comments, folks?
Bruce, yeah.
Yes, go for John.
Okay. Yeah, I commend the process, and I think that it'll be very interesting to see what they come up with, given that in the last 2 years we have seen extreme volatility in these funds, beginning with the first wave of COVID 2 years ago. They saw a dramatic decrease in these funds, and then a spectacular rise, and then more recently there's been a drop off again. So it'll be very interesting to compare those 6 as to how they compared to the average. And yeah, at the outset of this, I think we looked at perhaps appointing 1 fund manager, and I hear the talk this afternoon or this morning around the possibility of more than 1. And yeah, without preempting the process, I would be in favour of considering more than 1, just for the reasons that you've outlined about spreading risk. So no, a good process.
Thank you, John, for those comments. Don, welcome.
Thank you. Well, just on just the general reserves, how much have we got in our general reserves, or what is the amount that we could potentially be looking at to borrow to replace those reserves?
Around 41 million as at the 30th of June 2021.
Okay, so this process we're looking at, but we haven't quite established how much it is that we're going to be investing in these funds. But as far as the moderate risk funds go, it could be up to $41 million.
Yes, so we just need to eliminate the restricted reserves because at this stage they're not allowed for the investment policy. So it's probably around 40 million.
40 million, okay. Because we have talked a little bit in this committee about risk, managing risk, mitigating it where we can. But here we are, we're talking about creating some risk. So it could well be more than $41 million of community borrowing. Well, we're borrowing on behalf of the community. We've got interest rates rising, 4% increasing. Management fees, 1.5%. So these funds will have to generate, well, at least 6% to break even. And this is at a time when inflation seems to be rising. Interest costs, I mentioned, are rising. And we've got the tightening monetary conditions. And I think you don't have to go far back in time to recognise that that's not generally a good time to be putting money into the share market or the bond market. So I'm really concerned at the direction that this committee is travelling with regard to the advice that it's sending through to the council. It just seems a completely unnecessary risk for this council to be borrowing to invest in the share market and the stock market.
Thank you, Don. Look, you've made those comments a number of times, which I appreciate, and I have no trouble with you re-raising them at each point we discuss this. I think I'm wanting to reflect that the major policy decisions have been made, Don. So this is actually how we do it. But I think there are a couple of matters here that are warrant addressing. And Anne, you can correct me if I'm saying this wrong. From my perspective, this process is indeed about managing risk. As we discussed at the last meeting, our debt requirements are more than we can internally borrow. Secondly, it is clear that you're right, that we are wanting and need to think about being a long-term investor, not about the short term. So I do agree that there are some heavy weather for the investment market right at the moment. And that needs to be part of the consideration of and one would think any smart investment or fund manager would be talking to us about both the immediate heavy weather and also the long term. And your point's well made, that it would start to give rise to a sense of what can be achieved from a balanced fund approach that we have got here, because we are indeed trying to hit that balanced conservative line well. So your concerns are well made, but I would reflect the basic premise that we're undertaking this on, in part, in fact, a large part, is because to meet the needs of our community and what has been driven and discussed through the long-term plan is ones where we need to engage in this treasury management approach. So, even if we take on board your view about heightened risk, we're having to deal with that, and this is the best way which I think we can deal with it, Don. That would be my view. Members, I welcome any comments you had, but I want to stress we're trying to talk here about process and appointment of a fund manager, given the settings we've already had.
Okay, well, if I can respond, Mr. Chairman, you've talked about this council going to require more debt to do the work that is in the long-term plan and so on. Well, by adopting this policy, you've already accepted a huge chunk of debt on behalf of the ratepayers, and you've done nothing towards the long-term plan. All you've done is borrowed and put it into shares and bonds. Now, if you've got a guarantee and they go up 10, 20% every year, then that's great. That will help you realise these plans. But I'll just say again that this is a pretty uncertain time that we're entering now. And if we're going to be prudent managers of community resource, then I'm not sure that we need to be taking an extra step and borrowing to invest in the share market and the bond market while we wait for that capital, until we need that capital to invest in other projects. It seems to me like an unnecessary step that carries with it a tremendous amount of risk to our community capital.
Thanks, Don. As I said, you are commenting on a broader issue than we are dealing with right here at the moment in terms of the paper we have in front of us. And I am, but I said equally acknowledge that you have a particular principled position against the total scheme we're following down. I'm comfortable that you've made your protest. Unless members are prepared to change what we're doing at the moment, I'd like to suggest that we continue with the paper we have, which is, have we got a process and a weighting that is appropriate here for the appointment of a fund manager or managers. Thanks, Don.
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Chair, I think you've summed it up pretty well, that we've got this paper in front of us, and that's what we should be concentrating on. We went out and consulted with our communities through our LTP. So we've gone through that step, and this is now the step of making sure that we manage this process as best as we can. And I think that it's quite clear that the process that has been adopted is an appropriate one. It was a conservative approach, and I think that we need to move on with the recommendations that have been put in front of us. And to that end, I'm happy to move the recommendations as per the paper.
Thanks, Abel. Do I have a seconder, by the way?
I'm happy to second those. Yeah.
Thank you, John. So look, just to complete Anne's request off, John, you're obviously seconding because you said you're very happy with the process. It is important that if we are moving down this track, we do this with appropriate speed. And thank you that with Brett, you've got us to a position where we should be able to make decisions at our next meeting. Could I just check on page 264, and Abel and John, obviously happy for your comment as well. There is a recommended weighting here, and indeed approach to evaluation. Are you and the committee comfortable with that as well? I just want to close this off. Anne has asked us to comment on that, so I'm just wanting to check with that. I take it in moving the motion, you're comfortable essentially with the numbers that are sitting in here?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. John, you're okay?
Yep.
Are there any other comments from members about these weightings?
See, Paul Duffy's got his hand up, John. Bruce.
Oh, sorry, Abel. I didn't see you, Paul. My mistake, mate.
It's fine. Yes, no, I'm happy with the weightings. This isn't my field of expertise, but it does make logical sense to me. And I think, I mean, it's probably a layman's tendency to look at the fees and say, oh, God, it's only 10%. But I think in view of the competitive nature of the people we're looking at, that'll sort of look after itself, really. And so I believe it's, I don't think we could make it any better. So I'm happy with that, and understand that we have put a lot into this process already, and that we have operated in the past by sort of having money in the bank and operating very safely. But during that time, a lot of our work actually went undone, as we're seeing now with bridges and other things. So we're sort of taking on a different strategy now, and I think we've got to move forward with some confidence. Thank you. And I'll have to leave the meeting now, Mr. Chairman.
Well, look, thank you for your time this morning, Paul. Appreciate that, and all the best for the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Any other comments from folks? If that's the case, Anne, where you're comfortable we've covered your issues for you?
Yes, thank you. The issues in regards to this report anyway.
Thank you. Okay, so we, Abel, you've moved those. I won't read through them. You've done your preparation. It makes sense, but we are agreeing essentially what Anne has asked. So if there's no other debate on the motion, I'll put the motion, please. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against?
Nay.
Nay, would you like your vote against recorded, Don? And
Yes,
name. Okay.
please.
Fiona, if you could record Don's name, I would appreciate that. Okay, the motion is passed. Thank you for that. Thanks, Anne. Appreciate that and the work, and my appreciation to Brett, who's working hard on our behalf. It's good to have a acknowledged expert advisor helping us with this process. It's been worthwhile. Can I move to 613, which is the latest Waka Kotahi Technical Investment Audit Report? And I suspect Hartley is hanging around there somewhere. So Hartley, welcome back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, councillors. So this report covers a technical audit undertaken by Waka Kotahi, covering the network condition and management, and activity management plan, data quality, and road safety. There's two reports that they or two audits that they carry out. This being more on what we physically do versus the procedural audit, which was done the year before, which looks at how we procure services and more the financial aspects of the business. So the last technical audit was carried out in 2016, and any actions from that have all been actioned and signed off by Waka Kotahi, which is a good result. So with the latest audit, the overall audit rating came out as effective and indicated that overall the road network is being managed in a good condition. However, there were some points that they have highlighted in terms of the network is around the flushing or smoothness on our road network. And that's also something we identified as part of our activity management plan in the long term, or as part of that build up into the long-term plan, as some may be aware. From the report, there was also 4 recommendations that were identified. The key one probably be, or 2 key ones really for us, is around the net present value calculations that are required for culvert replacements. But it is noted at the moment the majority of our work tends to be more reactive as opposed to planned culvert replacements, which can make it a bit tricky. Once they've failed, they failed really. And in some cases result in road closures. So the team obviously keen to get those replaced as soon as possible and get the road open. But we do note that action. So any planned activities will ensure that that present value is calculated. It's very similar to, I suppose, our pavement rehabilitations. The process we follow for that also requires the likes of the net present value calculations. Aspects also raised was around data quality, particularly around the timing of that. And between the 2 years, we've already had a marked improvement with our data quality, and that's been noted through the Road Efficiency Group report. The other aspect was around road safety, particularly the road safety audits. So the design audits is a requirement again, or funding requirement from Waka Kotahi that we carry those out. And we did note that part of the influence of COVID was some of those dropped off, but we've already stepped that up again, and our 2021 audits have all been completed. And so we'll look to do the same again this construction season. We've already had 1 audit completed, which was a pre-construction audit, but at the completion of our construction season, we'll carry out those post-construction audits as required. The other aspects we raised was around that road safety area, was looking at sealing back on some of our intersections as an example. We did put in funding for that as part of the National Land Transport Program, but we were unsuccessful in obtaining funding for that activity of work. I suppose a bit of further comment on that, when the opportunities do arise through the likes of our pavement rehabilitation program, if there are any intersections that aren't sealed, we do seal back generally around 30 metres. It's just that we've got such a large network, it'll take a bit of time adopting that sort of approach to get around our entire network. That's probably the main highlights from my side, but happy to take any questions.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Hartley. Appreciate that. Okay, folk, do we have questions for Hartley? Yes, Gary, and then John.
Very interesting audit. Hartley, and I enjoyed some of your comments back in regards to this, but through the whole thing that it came down to funding, and your comments around, well, really the focus seems to be on zero, when some of these matters are actually a matter of safety. And I found it quite interesting. There was no offers or indications of further funding for these. So while the audit is what it is, and your answers back to them were, in my view, perfect, it's just so amazing that they indicated matters of safety, which then say they haven't got funding for. Just a comment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. John.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. Yeah, Hartley, the issue of flushing. You know, we saw some good photographs of it. So how much do you think it is on our roading network, and what can we do about it?
So, Mr. Chair, kind of a percentage on hand on that, but in terms of what we identified through our activity plan, is definitely an issue based on the age of our network, and over the next, effectively starting now, for the next 20 years, we will see that being a bigger issue, and hence why, I suppose, from a funding point of view, particularly our pavement rehabilitation program, is where we've seen the biggest uplift in funding requirement. If I look back at the previous three-year funding cycle, we probably averaged around the $2.8 million a year, where we've uplifting that closer to $5 million for this 3-year period, but ultimately looking at getting to around that $13 million mark as an average going forward. And that's probably one of the biggest areas in increased expenditure for our roading network, is in that pavement rehabilitation area to deal with this issue. We're seeing more of our pavement rehabilitations being required as a result of that CLA instability, as opposed to the pavement underneath failing. Don't get me wrong, there's still pavements that are failing, but that top layer is becoming a bigger and bigger issue.
Thank you, Hartley. April.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just like to endorse the previous comments, and it's an interesting report, and certainly enjoyed reading your comments, Hartley, to the report itself. And I think we also have to remember that through the LTP process, our ratepayers certainly indicated to us that the roading network is of a high priority to Southland District, and it's our lifeline that runs through our district, and that includes our culverts, bridges, and our roading. So I think it's important that we continue to remind ourselves of those sort of comments that were presented to us, and hence the need to spend some money on those roads and ensuring that we retain the good roads that we do have. Apart from that, I have no further comment.
Hartley, just I think I picked up the bit about moving to zero. You made some comments at the start here, Gary, and it interests me that we are below our peer councils for death and serious injury. I know the difficulty of attribution between that statistic and the quality of our roads, although we all, as councils, are required to draw some form of inference, which is important. So it did make me interested when I got to paragraph 15 about some of the challenges of the funding around zero. If indeed we're going to continue the attribution to death and serious injury. I suppose I'm only making a comment because you're indicating some of the funding challenges that actually that doesn't seem to be allowed for significantly in terms of the program. Have I picked that one up right, Hartley?
Yes, sir. That's correct. So there's some, I suppose that's a disappointing thing. You have an audit carried out, like as such, identifies an area, you apply for funding in that particular area, but you don't necessarily obtain that funding. It's not to say we didn't get any funding around road safety. There's the funding that we did receive was around sites that were specifically identified with Waka Kotahi for the national road safety pipeline tool, mainly around intersection improvements. One that's currently been undertaken is Two Chain Road, as an example, that many will be familiar with. But it is, yeah, I suppose it is disappointing when you do, something does get highlighted and you don't obtain the funding to go with it.
Thank you. John, another question?
Yeah, this is one that came through on the photographs, Hartley. It's a wee bit of a nitpicking one, but that bridge that we built on Ashes Road that was offline, what remedial action can we take with that?
So with the bridges, we've had some of them basically uplifted and then repositioned correctly. So the bridge itself has been, readjusted to ensure that it does approach safely.
So my understanding was that when it was put in, it was offline to the centre of the carriageway. So, or one approach would be to alter the approach so that it came in at right angles or whatever. But yeah, so basically what I'm asking from a risk point of view, how did it happen that the bridge got positioned the way it did?
Yeah, so there's numerous sort of reasons for it when we've delved into a bit of the detail. One is around that a lot of that package of work, the original bridges were a lot shorter, around the 6 metre length, and then the bridge that's gone in has been 8 to 10 metres in length, as an example, but they've been overspanned. And so when they've taken the centre line and lined it up, that extra bit of length has effectively caused it to be a lot skewer to the road than what the shorter bridge was. So that's been one of the reasons for it. And so learning from particularly the contractor from that point of view has been when they've gone out to site and surveying the road, it's actually surveying the road back a lot longer and tying in the centre lines a lot longer. So there's been quite a bit of learnings holistically on how to actually ensure this doesn't happen again. So just going back to part of your previous question around, I suppose, mechanisms to address it. One is obviously uplift the bridge and reinstate it. The other is looking at how we can adjust the road. So all those options are up for grabs. It's just looking at what's the most cost effective. And each site, with anything like this, each site will have its own issues or limitations. And so we've got to take it with each site on a site basis when something like this does occur.
Yeah, appreciate that.
Thank you, John. Gary, final comment?
Just a question to probably yourself and Cameron. So the Hartley and his team have had an opportunity to respond to this audit. Would it be appropriate for governance to respond as well based on this report now? Because it does come down to funding, and in some ways this report is critical, probably not as critical as other places in the country, but I believe it needs to be. I believe it needs to be probably an address made to the governance side of Waka Kotahi that we've received this audit, and I believe governance. Well, just the question is, should governance actually respond to this report too, based on some of the comments?
Hartley or Cameron, have you got a view on that?
Look, thank you. Whether it's on behalf of council, it never hurts to remind Waka Kotahi that one, there's not sufficient funding coming back to Southland where a lot of their road user charges are generated, and two, as unfortunately Waka Kotahi is subject to the whims of whatever political change is blowing at the time, and there are some quite concerning features around recent changes to fuel excise taxes that may actually have a longer term implication for long-term funding. And we are, as this conversation's been talking, we are very dependent on that money for our roading network. So always a good idea to keep in terms of staying in front of Waka Kotahi.
Yes, I know that, was it Dawn, somebody who did this? I don't know whether what Dawn does with the report, whether Waka Kotahi governance see it or not, but there's probably a lot of time and money gone into this. Whether we pay for that or not, I don't know. But anyway, just my thoughts.
Thank you, Gary. Well, look, I'll, from a perspective of, is there an action point here? And I think that's a more principled discussion between at council, Gary, as to whether it should go back. I mean, I at a risk level don't see an issue. Oh, you're going to correct me or do something, Abel? Get it right? No,
I'm not going to correct you. I suppose there is an option available to this committee, and that is do not accept the report. We don't have to accept their report, considering the concerns that we have.
Well, I was actually, in my head, the letter would have gone, thank you for your assessment. It's great that we're effective. We want to improve, but there's a barrier. Well, I think, said sensibly. I mean, I want to say well done to Hartley with a green sign on page 271 there, overall rating of effective. This is our big spend area. That's a good result to come out of a technical audit. But I think if we were to reflect back to the Waka Kotahi board that was thought seriously about their very important recommendations, we have a challenge in meeting that recommendation, which is their funding. So that would be, my head was spinning in through the way I would, I shouldn't use the word spin in communication, that's not right. The way in which I would think a good letter could be crafted back, which Abel, I would think we want to reflect the seriousness with which we take a technical audit, as we do with all our other audits. And also, but as I say, reflect this challenge to actually meet the recommendations which we do want to.
Yeah, no, I'm happy with that.
Exactly, Mr. Chair, and this is a Finance and Assurance Committee, and it comes down to funding, and we hear from Hartley and his team and other teams as well that the money is the issue, and then we hear from our shareholders, our ratepayers, that money is the issue. So it all comes down to the dollars.
Yeah.
Right. Well, look, there's an action point here. Then I think there is a strong view. Cameron, perhaps you can advise us who best it is penned from, whether it comes as a result from this committee, which would suggest that potentially I sign, whether it's from council as a whole, in which case Gary would sign, or whether it's joint. I don't know. Can I leave that in your capable hands, Hartley, to work with Cameron on to work through what is the way to respond?
You're comfortable with that? Yeah.
Well, I think we've I'm just conscious of time, probably useful to keep moving. I'm very comfortable though that we did spend a lot of time because it's our dominant area of spend. So it's not just the only area of outcome for our community, but it's a big part of it. So thank you for that. So Hartley, if I could just conclude on the fact that when I go to the overall assessment, the technical assessment, and it must be significant because it's a good number of years since I've done the last one. I suppose COVID might have affected that. It's come out overall as effective. So thank you to you and your team for the work that you've done, and encourage you to keep it up. That'd be great. Okay, I'll move from the chair that we receive the report. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you. John, John, you pressed the button. I thought you were putting your hand up to second my motion, but I'll take it as seconded. Thank you. Any discussion on the motion? There being none, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. Okay, I would like to keep going till 12:30, if that's okay with you folk, which is a planned break for half an hour. So I think we can continue that process. So we are on to page 289, which is the recommendation to move into public excluded for the points that are noted on that page. I'll move the procedural motion that we go into public excluded. Thank you, Abel. Is there any discussion on the motion? There being none, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? It's carried. You just confirm